It is not right. A woman is an adult female, and the court has made that absolutely clear. I actually welcome the judgment because I think it gives real clarity. It allows those that have got to draw up guidance to be really clear about what that guidance should say. If you want to fight for Remain, vote Labour. Now, there are some who say we don't need Brexit to work. We need to reverse it. I couldn't disagree more. Day after day, there are new allegations of sleaze, of favours, of privileged access. And it's all very well the Prime Minister saying, well, say now, well, I'm paying for it.
You've decided to repay £6,000 worth of gifts.
Lord Ali is facing an investigation. I wonder how concerned you are that your biggest donor was not fully transparent.
Are you saying you made a mistake?
It was right for me to make those repayments. Thank you.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very, very good morning to you. Welcome to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Don't know why I'm smiling. It's all gloomy and miserable outside. I've said I've been cheerful for the last week because we've had nice weather, but miserable again. Hope it's nicer where you are than where we are here at Talk Towers. Enjoying your day. Hopefully we'll keep you company and keep you warm and cosy. Listening on DAB Plus radio or on your smart speaker, or you could be watching on YouTube or your connected device. Don't worry, it's safe today. Philip Ingram is joining me, but you haven't got the glint of his medals in your eye as we had on VE Day. We're very proud to have you here once again. Philip Ingram, MBE, former Senior Military Intelligence Officer. Very good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
Lots to talk about. Great to have you here, particularly, I mean, how much Ukraine and Gaza are both in the news. But coming up in this house, going to talk about the economy. And woohoo, at 7 a.m, we found out the UK's economy had grown by more than expected. It's always more or less than expected because the economists haven't got a sodding clue what they're doing. That's the best way of putting it. Basically, in the first 3 months of the year, according to the latest official figures, grew by 0.7% from January to March. I know, we're so excited, and I'm sure you feel so much better off in the last few months, don't you? Anyway, we're going to talk about that. Plus, crucially, I want to hear from you on this. The Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood had a surprise press conference last night, warning that prisons are once again at breaking point, announced that more criminals will be released early to free up space behind bars, including domestic abusers and sexual offenders. Do you have any idea how much of a threat you have to be as a domestic abuser before you get put behind bars? Any idea at all? Goodness me. Even if they, when they do get released early, if they do actually breach the terms of their release, they'll only face there's a blanket 28 days back behind bars if they do that. That's including domestic abusers. The Domestic Abuse Commissioner, unsurprisingly, has said that lives are being put in danger by those emergency measures. But don't worry, they are building 3 more prisons. Of course, Tories and Labour to blame on this. Tories in power for 14 years, failing to build more prisons. Really? Who thought that was a good idea? Also, we know how dangerous prisons are for prison officers, as an inmate slashed a prison officer's throat at HMP Woodhill yesterday. It's just the latest incident in a string of very, very serious violent offences against officers behind bars. Meanwhile, over in Turkey, Vladimir Putin will not meet with Volodymyr Zelensky in Istanbul today to discuss ending the war in Ukraine. The Kremlin confirmed late last night that he would not attend the high-level talks, which prompted Washington to confirm that Donald Trump would not travel to Turkey either. And Labour is going to hand NHS bosses bonuses of up to £45,000 if they do a good job cutting waiting lists. This is under new plans, while failing managers could see their pay cut. I would have thought it was rather obvious that people shouldn't be paid a bonus for doing their sodding job properly, and they shouldn't get a pay cut if they can't do it well. they should be sacked. But I'm old-fashioned like that. Loads to talk about. I particularly want to hear from you about the prisons. In particular, prisons are at a breaking point. Going to have more early releases. We know what happened last time. Early releases, by the way, resulted in someone being murdered on the very day that a prisoner was released. That prisoner went on to murder somebody. But no risk. Nothing to see here, everybody. But they're going to free up space. It's going to include domestic abusers. It's going to include sex offenders. And if they do actually breach the terms of their licence, they will actually only face a block, basic month back behind bars. I want to know your reaction to that. Give us a call. 0344 499 1000. You can text the word talk in your message to 87222. You can get in touch with us on X at talkTV. Calls are, as you know, are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. I'd love to hear from you, just your general views on this. I'd love to hear from you if you've been a victim of crime. I'd love to hear from you if you have actually been a perpetrator of crime. Come on, you talk, listeners and viewers. Odds are there are some of you. If you've been behind bars, love to hear from you. If you're a prison officer, a probation officer, give us a call. Love to hear all your thoughts. Later in the show, we are going to be hearing from the Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick. After he, in about half an hour, has got an urgent question in the House of Commons. But in the next half hour, we'll be hearing from former prison governor Vanessa Frake and plenty more besides. Right now, though, let's hear from Philip Ingram on all the big topics. Philip, thank you so much once again for joining us.
My pleasure. It's good to be here.
Let's start with prisons and then we'll talk about the economy, because I don't think those economic figures are exciting the world too much. But, I mean, prisons are breaking point. We knew this was going to happen. Last September, we had those early releases and we had, the sight of someone being picked up with a Lamborghini, people, wags in their best tracksuits with their spraying champagne.
Bottles of champagne.
Yeah, I mean, people just going, I'm going to be back in bars, behind bars pretty soon, odds are. I mean, it was made a laughing stock of the justice system, such as it's not already a laughing stock. We knew this was going to happen. They said they're going to build 3 more prisons. Those are being built, but you're not going to build them overnight. Probation service worried, domestic abuse, victims commissioners both worried about this. What's your reaction?
Well, this is something that, in defence of the current government, they inherited from the previous government, who did nothing. Our criminal justice system is, in tatters. It comes down to very poor leadership across the prison service. It comes down to too much focus on wokery. And either putting people who don't meet the woke bits behind bars, as we saw with those that do hurty tweets. Well,
Lucy Connolly has her appeal against her 31-month sentence. And again, I mean, I'd rather call me old-fashioned. Should we let it's the men's estate, which is at 99% capacity, but the women's estate, they always say too many women behind bars. I mean, she's having 31 months. She's not a threat to anybody.
Yeah, and this is the thing. It has to be a threat to society. But it's passing the buck from the prison system onto the probation system, and the probation system is creaking as well, and there's no plans to deal with this, and if the new government had come in where they'd done plans and they got something together and they'd thought about it beforehand, because they'd 14 years to prepare for this. They knew the Tories had created a disaster in the prison service, but it's quite clear that there are no plans. They're making it up as they go along, and people are just going to suffer.
But it does
people
take time. Yeah, exactly. And again, often people talk, it's non-violent offenders. Then of course it is violent offenders. It's just not the most serious. It's not terrorists. It's not rapists and things. But at the end of the day, you've got a lot of people. Domestic abuse. How many times are we going to hear about the statistics that the single biggest risk to women is a partner or an ex-partner? We know that. I mean, again and again, whenever there's a case where a woman is killed by her partner or ex-partner, she's been in touch with it's not out of the blue thing. She's been in touch with the police a million times. She often there is a restraining order that is being breached. Nothing happens. Restraining order breached. Nothing happens. And if he goes behind bars, gets out again, breaches the terms, nothing happens. And again, even like the sort of there's someone on the radio yesterday pointing out, 75% of people who return to prison after early release it's not for committing another crime. It's for breaching the terms of their release. Not turning up to an appointment, not informing them where they're living. And you think, but they're the terms of their release, right? So what is the incentive to obey the terms of your release, which are there for a purpose? We're told they're being monitored. Well, you can't be monitored if no one knows where you are and no one sees you. So no one's being sodding monitored anyway. We know that.
Exactly, but when prisoners are released on licence, it doesn't mean that they have been released from their punishment in prison. They're still undergoing a prison sentence. The difference is that the licence says we're not going to lock you away every evening we're going to in our facility, we're going to let you stay in a place that we have assessed,
it doesn't cost
that
us
we
fortune.
monitor, and doesn't cost us the same sort of amount of money.
They don't assess it, they don't monitor.
Correct.
The probation service is massively overstretched. They've got too many people to monitor, to cover, and they're often very inexperienced. Lots of people have just given up on the job.
Exactly, and this is part of the problem. You know, if the Labour Party had come in with a plan, they could have started to address it. But at the minute, well, there's lots of just trying to find new ideas.
As I was just saying to Mike, it's fascinating. Just looking at this morning, and it's on the front pages of Daily Mail and Telegraph and others, and the Times. But it is fascinating. BBC could barely find it. I mean, I'm sure it's there somewhere. I'm not saying they've hid it. It was in the news yesterday, and yes, news moves on. Gaza, all over the news. But something that actually affects people here in Britain. It does affect us more. Not in the news. And again, you don't have to have been a victim of crime. Your likelihood of being a victim of crime goes up when there are fewer people who are going behind bars. And we know that magistrates and judges, they have been, over the last 14, 15 years, they have been giving longer sentences to some prisoners. Now, the fact that the Tories brought in a system where, we give longer sentences, which is what the public demanded, but didn't think that might involve needing more prison places. And I mean, genuinely, I think that's the most incisive political commentary I can give on this policy. But that's the thing. That's the level of idiocy we are talking about. Massive cuts to the criminal justice system across the board. Huge delay in courts. But the conundrum I can't work out is the police barely arrest anyone. Most police officers, the stats show in this country, don't arrest anyone from 1 year to the next. I mean, it's shocking. Barely any crime. I mean, burglary, most thefts. You're talking about 1 to 3% max of people actually ever getting punished for the crime. Okay, we're virtually lawless right now. Very few people who get caught by the police are actually prosecuted by the CPS. Look, I've been going through. I think it's only because me providing all the evidence and me being sharp elf middle class that the man who stole my bag is actually facing charges. And that took 8-9 months for it to happen. I mean, again, I'm still waiting to see if it actually happens, guys. We'll see. I don't know how much video evidence you need, of a crime, really. But so people, if you do get arrested, likelihood of you getting charged are pretty minimal. The likelihood of you going to jail as a result of it is so minimal anyway, unless you've written a hurty tweet.
Yes.
The odds of you going to prison are remarkably low in this country. So how is it there are barely any arrests, barely any charges, barely anyone sent to prison, and yet the prisons are bursting? I mean, that's a question I'm going to put to Robert Jenrick. It's a question I'm going to put to Vanessa Frake, former prison governor, because I can't work out what's going on.
Yeah, and there's no rehabilitation going on. And
23 hours in a cell.
A measurement of the thinking that's gone in. Previous government caused the problem. It's a current government problem, but level of thinking that's gone into it, they're going to adopt, from what I understand from the commentary that came out yesterday, a plan that has been put together by the former government minister, who's now out of government, but he's continuing with his plan, and that's what the current government are going to bring in, which is in a way good because he's got the experience that's there. But it's a sad admission that there's been no new thinking brought into it.
My big worry is that most of the people involved in this don't really approve of prison. They certainly don't think the prison is there primarily to punish and to deter. Actually, add in, and to protect the public. They think it's about rehabilitation, which is the one thing we abjectly failed to do in this country. But the other three aims are very, very worthwhile in themselves. When someone is behind bars, they are not able to commit crimes against wider law-abiding society. That in itself is a good thing. I certainly believe that prison is a deterrence. It certainly deters me from things I would largely do to people on the tube on my day, my journey into work and journey home every day. If there were not prison sentences,
we frisk you for machine guns before you're allowed to leave.
I'm not allowed. We've all agreed, not allowed to have a gun. Of course, it works as a deterrent. Of course, it does. Unless someone's completely drug-addled or whatever. But this is the thing: people get more drug-addled in prison. Prison is not working, but that's not an argument to have fewer people behind bars or release them earlier. That's an argument to do prison better. And that would be more expensive. It would be a lot more expensive. But you know what's really expensive is people having their stuff stolen and insurance premiums going up and people having to close up shops because the scale of shoplifting is so off the scale. People being scared of walking the streets, or daughters being worried about walking home from the bus stop at night, kids being scared in school. That costs a lot of money. Taking people in and out of police stations, in and out of the courts, again and again and again, in and out of prison again and again throughout their lives. That costs a fortune.
Yep.
I would so much rather we spent that money to prevent people committing crime in the first place. We've got to shore up families. We have got to shore up the education system. Kids, look, you know, the kids who are being failed by their parents, failed by their schools, failed by social services, who end up in care system that is failing, end up on the streets, end up in gangs, end up on drugs, end up committing crime. Of course they do. Of course they do. We need to stop that cycle. And you've got to get people off drugs. You've got to get people into stronger family units. There's so much that we can do. Meanwhile, we've got a government that constantly sort of nanny states all the law-abiding people, everything we do. Why don't you worry about the people who are failing and the people who are being failed and leave the rest of us alone?
Well, we need basic discipline back in society again, I'm afraid. You know, it's good old-fashioned values, and it starts off with family values, it's community values, and it works its way up through there. It has to be...
there are things that work and things that don't work.
Exactly. The schools have to reinforce them. You know, as soon as you get lack of discipline in schools, yes, the majority of kids will get through, but will be affected by the minority that are causing the problems. Those minority will go out and commit the majority of crimes later on.
It's like 100,000 people responsible for about 50% of crime.
Exactly.
Let's tackle them. Exactly. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Give us a call. If you're a criminal, love to hear from you. 0344 499 1000. Really appreciate you getting in touch on that. Let's talk about the economy. Figures at 7 o'clock this morning from the ONS. Economy grew up 0.7% from January to March. There's some talk it's slightly higher than many expected. But I mean, we're still in the doldrums. I mean, if we're cheering 0.7% growth, it's the highest of the countries that announced so far their figures. I mean, yippity-doo-dah. There's a talk that some of this may be a load of orders being processed before worries about tariff war. That's possible, but we don't know yet. But at the end of the day, if that's where we are, you know, this is pitiful.
Yeah. At the general election, we were the fastest growing economy in the G7. Full stop. Yeah, that was.
Yeah, but still rubbish.
It was still complete and utter rubbish.
Oh, by the way, per head of the population, it's only 0.5%.
As we went into the election, the now new government turned around and came out with all of their plans and said to achieve all of those plans, we need between 2 and 2.5% growth, and then we can afford this, and we'll do that quite easy because they thought we're on that growth. 0.7, to my maths, isn't anywhere near 2% or 2.5%. And therefore what that's saying to me is that all of the plans that the government were elected on from an economic perspective remain unaffordable.
Yeah. Do you think we're going to see, as actually a former senior infrastructure advisor at the Treasury who's spoken up publicly, that there are going to have to be tax rises in the autumn?
I think there are going to have to be tax rises in the autumn, you know, and that's going to affect the majority of people. And there should have been tax rises coming in beforehand, because there are things that can be taxed that will bring in huge amounts of revenue
without damaging the economy.
Without damaging the economy, that aren't being taxed.
Such as
gambling. You know, the online gambling at the minute is going through the roof. You know, I was sitting watching.
It's not a necessity, that's for sure.
It's not. I was sitting watching television last night at 7:10. There were gambling adverts on the television. That's appalling. That's disgusting. You know, we shouldn't have that. So you treat it in the same way that they've treated alcohol advertising, smoking advertising, all the rest of it. Vapes. Obnoxious. I hate walking through clouds of vapes. Put the same sort of tariffs on vapes that you're going to get that we've got on cigarettes and everything else. It's obnoxious. You know, if people are doing it for health reasons to get off smoking, then prescriptions through the NHS, you can get away from that. But the rest of it, if it's social,
that's what everyone would then claim. But okay, that's it. Well, again, a lot of people. My thing is, what are they going to spend the taxes on? I just don't know if they're going to spend it on the stuff that we actually care about. But there we are. Yeah. So let's talk about something completely different. Let's talk about Ukraine, because bearing in mind a lot of the problems we've got right now are down to, appalling governing of this country for many decades, let's be honest. Let's blame them all. But also, of course, lockdown policy supported by Labour as much as the Tories, but also the Ukraine war and that impact on energy prices and everything else. The Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky has landed in Turkey's capital of Ankara for talks with President Erdogan. We found out last night that President Putin was not on the list of people expected to arrive. Donald Trump, who's in the Middle East, he's saying, oh, no, I'm not going. And, hey, Vladimir Putin was only going to go if I was going to go, and I'm not going to go, and he's not going to go. So the plan was that they were going to meet, I thought, in Istanbul for these high-level talks. We know that the people who are being sent by Vladimir Putin are fairly low-level, pretty hardliners. We don't really expect anything to change in terms of the Russian position. But is this a PR victory for President Zelensky? And if so, in what way does it matter?
Oh, 100%. It matters because it was Vladimir Putin that called for these talks personally, thinking that Zelensky wouldn't give in. Zelensky had asked for a 30-day ceasefire starting on Monday.
Backed by European leaders.
Exactly. Putin went no. Well, and backed by Donald Trump as well, because the European leaders and the leaders of the coalition are willing put Trump into a corner. And the Americans were expecting big things out of this. Whilst Donald Trump's not going, we've got Marcus Rubio, we've got Steve Witkoff, and we've got Keith Kellogg going. That's quite a senior team. We've got President Erdogan of Turkey there, who's hosting it. President Zelensky's appeared. And the Russians have got their Z team.
Yeah.
We've got a presidential advisor, Medinsky. We've got Galuzhin, who's the Deputy Foreign Minister.
This is quite an insult. Again, it's another insult to Donald Trump.
It's a big insult to Donald Trump.
And it's not like keeping Witkoff waiting 8 hours.
Exactly.
But this is the thing. Zelensky is calling Putin's bluff. I go, well, I'm turning up. I'm going to sit in this room waiting for you. I'm assuming they're going to have the sense to have a visual of him sitting there. I want them to have the big white table just for a laugh, just so something that Putin would have been happy about sitting at. He does like his long white tables. And basically, look, he's not here, but I am. I'm waiting to this. But all this is not about trying to have a one over on Vladimir Putin. This is all about the messaging to Donald Trump, isn't it?
Yes.
Talk us through that.
It is, because we had after that terrible event in the Oval Office where J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, started the ambush on President Zelensky, and then Donald Trump rounded on him, and everything seemed to be anti-Zelensky. Then we had the iconic photograph of Zelensky and Trump sitting in the Vatican, heads bowed together, where Donald Trump then came out more on the side of the Ukrainians and Zelensky. And then we had an easing back on that, and we had a bouncing backwards and forwards where Putin asked for a 72-hour ceasefire to cover his Victory in Europe Day parades. Zelensky turned around and said, no, let's make it 30 days because you can achieve nothing in 72 hours. Putin went, no. Let's have a meeting in Turkey. And Zelensky went, yeah, OK, we'll do that. And Putin wanted it not this Thursday, but next Thursday. Zelensky went, no, we'll do it this Thursday. And they got Trump to agree on that. So Zelensky has, with the backing of European and coalition of the willing leaders.
This is all messaging to Trump, though, isn't it? We're trying to force Trump to realise Putin's playing you.
Yeah, exactly.
You're looking like a fool. You're embarrassing and humiliating yourself, your administration, and America. And I'm hoping this is working. I'm
4D
quite
chess,
impressed.
and Putin is in check at the minute.
Yeah, I have to say I'm surprised at Putin, who's such a wily figure, that he's done this so badly. Just fine. I need to go to break, but just very quickly, Israel, Gaza, very much in the news over issues in terms of aid, food aid going into Gaza. Accusations of genocide, of course, against the Israeli forces and Israeli government, and we're told famine, starvation. Although we've had those allegations for 18 months and. I mean, it's all these people who apparently have had no food all this time, but also these claims that these attacks on hospitals and some other grounds are acts of war. Just really briefly, we'll come back to this, but really briefly, what's your reaction to that?
Well, again, it's more Hamas propaganda. That's the trouble.
Why is it being reported by people like the BBC and Sky News and ITV as if it's fact then?
Well, because they've decided that they've been called out enough using Hamas figures. So you're using the BBC report itself. It says at least 80 people have been killed in Israeli strikes across Gaza. Hospitals and first responders say. Well, no, hospitals
Who
and
runs
first
the
responders.
hospitals?
Who runs them and others say it's still Hamas that's doing it. Hamas knows that putting these numbers out there causes such a reaction in the West.
And it doesn't matter if there's a fact-clearing exercise later on.
And genocide, if Israel wanted to cause genocide and to exterminate the Palestinian people in Gaza, it would have taken them 3 or 4 days, and they'd have bulldozed the rubble.
And here's the
into
difference.
the Mediterranean.
Israel can do it but choose not to.
Correct.
Hamas want to do it but have been unable to do it.
Correct.
But it is still official Hamas policy to have
destroy
Israel and every single Jew.
Yeah.
Small point worth making. 10:25 is the time. I'd love to hear your thoughts on everything we're talking about. I'm going to be talking, by the way, also about the a policy of the migration free, something that's been pushed by Nigel Farage of Reform UK. It's backed by nearly half the voters, 46%. Not just cutting migration, but one in, one out. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well. 0244 499 1000. And of course, on prisons, don't forget at 10:30 we are going to be hearing from a former prison governor, Vanessa Frake, big friend of the show, about what she makes of the announcement from the Justice Secretary yesterday about early release of prisoners yet again. Get to your calls, get to your messages, all coming in just a couple of moments. This is Talk.
Nigel Farage needs to get in touch with his own moral compass. He needs to try and identify some integrity within his own character. And he needs to be true to the persona which he has sold to the British people. He needs to apologise to Rupert Lowe. He needs to put right the damage he's done to Rupert Lowe and to many, many other people who've been set aside in the same way that Rupert Lowe has. And he needs now to carry the hopes faithfully. He needs to carry the torch of the hopes.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, for me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Coming up to 10:28. Let's get some of your messages about prisons. Justice Secretary said yesterday prisons are at breaking point. Again, yes, they're going to have to be more early release of prisoners. It'll include domestic abusers and sex offenders, and even if they do breach the terms of their early release, they'll only face 28 days behind bars. That's now the standard, because a huge number of people who are behind bars now are people who have breached the terms of their early release. Isn't that an argument for them not to get early release? I don't know, coming out on a limb there. You've been getting in touch. Brian says they could deport all the foreign prisoners. That'll save the taxpayers some money and free up room. Am I wrong? Well, I mean, it's 10%, isn't it? 10% of everyone behind bars is a foreign prisoner. Maybe we should just not have people here who are more likely to commit crimes. It's interesting, the Prime Minister's over in Albania today talking about illegal migration. We did have that deal which kind of massively cut the huge number of Albanians who came for a couple of years. Huge number of foreign prisoners are Albanians.
Yeah, but it seems as if he's respelt Rwanda, Albania.
Yeah, there is that, yeah. Jackie says, wrong on so many counts, plus when they get returned to jail, only allowed to be locked up for 28 days is nuts. Harry says, if prison was an actual punishment, fewer people would want to go to prison and they would commit less crime. Molly says, how about freeing the political prisoners instead? Indeed, Lucy Connolly's appeal coming today. Dennis says, why don't they release the political prisoners first instead of rapists, child molesters and violent thugs? I mean, you and your sensible ideas, eh? Andrew's on the line. He's given us a call on 0344 499 1000 and he's in Hertfordshire. Very good morning to you, Andrew. How are you, my love?
Bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and I hope you both of you are as well. In relation to this prisoner thing, initially, it just shows you the lack of depth in the government when you heard her speaking. I mean, he really is, you know, the king. The one-eyed man is the king.
He's the best of a bad lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So in relation to the prisoners, that person that's come through, the foreign prisoners, we just need to go to the countries where they're from and cancel all visas and push diplomats back. And they have to send planes to take them back. So that gives us space. And then you have to prioritise not letting people that have committed crimes against women and girls out. You've got to keep society safe. This is a real failing, and it isn't funny.
No, exactly. I mean, again, when you've got the Domestic Abuse Commissioner and the Victims Commissioner both saying that this is going to be a risk, and again, we know domestic abuse. Do you know how bad you have to be to actually get put behind bars for domestic abuse? I mean, there are women again and again, you know, the ex threatening them, message after message, call after call, standing outside their house, breaching rules in terms of, not being able to come near them and all these different orders, and they still don't get put behind bars. So the ones who are behind bars are the absolute wrong uns.
Yeah, and the problem that you have there, Julia, is they're the ones that we know about.
Thank you. Very, very fair point. Andrew, I despair at the whole thing. Don't you think part of the issue is that the people who are running the prisons now, it seems to me, the people who are in charge, justice secretaries, they don't really think that prison's a good thing?
Yeah, the prison officers do a very good job. They had that thing called Fresh Start, which annihilated their terms and conditions, and that when you get the governor on, she'll expect you.
Yeah.
Their job is impossible.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, they've got human rights lawyers telling them must have everything, and on the other side, they've got limited resources.
Yeah, and they're paid a pins, and we've seen yet again yesterday another violent attack on a prison officer. I was saying yesterday, I don't know how anyone could even do that job now. It's so dangerous. It's just routine now, prison officers get attacked. Andrew, thank you for that. Apologies to everyone for the quality of that phone line at the end. Let's go to another call on a completely different topic. Ian is in London. Ian, you wanted to talk about where we are with Israel and Gaza.
Yeah, good morning, Julia. Bless you yet again. I've said it so many times, you're fantastic.
God bless you.
Right? And so is Philip Ingram.
He is.
Philip will agree with this.
And he knows what he's talking about, unlike me.
Yeah. But that's right. But as he says, with Israel, if they wanted to wipe out Gaza, they could have done it on October the 9th and 10th, like years ago. But more to the point, going back to with Sky, even more so than the BBC, Sky have led with 4 or 5 articles this morning about Ben Cohen from Ben and Jerry's is decrying Robert Kennedy for killing Gazan children.
I know.
Not once in that article did they ever mention about the babies that were sort of slaughtered on October the 7th in Israel. Not once.
No. It's so ridiculously one-sided. But also, again, as we were discussing with Philip a few moments ago, whenever there are reports of things like, A, we know that all the information coming out of Gaza is coming from Hamas, ultimately, and is being approved by Hamas. And B, we know absolutely that they have repeatedly lied. Remember early on about a hospital being attacked? Well, here's the hospital still in existence. No, there are absolutely no terrorists who are hiding among the civilian people. Well, apart from all the time that even they admit that in this particular bombing of this place, that place, they lost 10 of their leaders. I mean, they lie on it. They lie for a living.
Well, it is. I just think, I don't know if it's right or wrong, the Sky supposedly are going to come off being just normal way on TV. It's going to be a paid subscription shortly.
There's some talk. I know their contracts out, but again, They're going a certain way. I mean, I agree with you. I think Sky in lots of ways are worse than BBC on some of these issues. Ian, thank you very much for your call. We both appreciate your very kind words about us. We do our best, do we not?
We do.
I was very proud earlier this week to attend an event held by the Israeli Embassy, the 77th anniversary of the, I've probably got the dates, the time's wrong, of Israel's existence, and very, very proud to be there. So I have to say, some wonderful souls there. They really were. Right, it's 10:34. We're going to take a quick break. First up, though, it is time to find out how you could be in with a chance of winning a weekend away in Munich at the end of May to watch, of course, the biggest game in European football, the Champions League final. We're also putting £5,000 in your pocket to spend however you want. Have a listen.
Win a once-in-a-lifetime trip to watch the Champions League final live. Go to talksport.com/win for your chance to embark on the ultimate odyssey of football ecstasy. With 2 tickets to the Champions League final live at the iconic Munich Football Arena, Germany, including flights, accommodation and an uber-massive £5,000 in your hand. How about that? Enter online now at talksport.com/win. Terms and conditions apply. Achtung, baby.
18 plus, UK, excluding Northern Ireland. For a chance to win all of that, simply text the word football to 83338 by the 16th of May at 11 p.m. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You must have the bill payer's permission, or send your name and number by post to Champions League final competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 21st of May. This is a TalkSport limited competition run on TalkSport Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
Indeed. Thank you very much indeed to Mike for that. Don't miss out on that incredible giveaway from our colleagues at TalkSport. Coming up, let's take a quick break, then we're going to be hearing from former prison governor Vanessa Frake, what she makes of the, yet again, more early release, because our prisons are at breaking point. Whose fault is it and what do we do about it? This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Delighted to be joined right now by Vanessa Frake. She's a former prison governor. She's also author of The Governor, My Life Inside Britain's Most Notorious Prisons. Very, very good morning to you, Vanessa.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you once again for joining you. Now, look, you've basically spent years working at high-security women's prisons, but you also worked at the men's prison, HMP, Wormwood Scrubs as well. What did you make of this press conference last night from Jabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, saying basically prisons are at breaking point again? We kind of knew that. They had early release last September. I think that this would happen again. And that there would be more early releases, and also crucially that anyone who was released early, including domestic abusers and other violent offenders, and even some sex offenders, that actually they would only face 28 days return to prison if they breached the terms of their early release. What did you make of all of that?
Gosh, I mean, look, when we had the early releases last year. It was a knee-jerk reaction, and I also think that it was very naive of this government to think that would solve the crisis until 2026. Myself and others said that if something better wasn't done, that we would be in the same situation within 6 months, and here we are again.
Yeah,
I think. Yeah, it's almost like Groundhog Day, to be honest. And I think this time, by hiring the sentences for recalls from 12 months to 12 months to 4 years is very worrying. 4 years is a significant sentence, and from not including domestic violence and all those that are associated with domestic violence, such as coercion, harassment, stalking, etc. From this, I think, is very worrying. And, there's various DV charities that are incredibly concerned, and I'm sure that there are many survivors and victims who are equally concerned.
And we know the Domestic Abuse Commissioner and the Victims Commissioner have both spoken out and talked about the risk to women. And again, you and I both know, a partner or an ex-partner who is harassing, threatening his girlfriend or wife or ex, he ain't going to prison for a year to 4 years on the first offence, and he ain't going to prison for 3 to 4 years for just sort of a little bit of one threatening text. We are talking often about men, and it's largely men, and we're also talking about and women as the victims who have been incredibly threatening, who are known to be dangerous, repeat offences.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's incredibly worrying, and I don't know why this government has decided to not include those in the same way as terrorists, murderers, rapists, and child molesters. Yeah. I just don't understand that.
Especially as we're so often told that so many people behind bars aren't a threat to society. That said, I consider the shoplifters, to be a threat. Bearing in mind that you have to commit on average at least 10 offences. Be prosecuted for at least 10 offences, usually often up to 20 offences before prison is even considered for a shoplifter. By the way, those are just the ones they're prosecuted for and just the ones that they're caught for. So we're talking about realistically hundreds of offences before someone goes to prison for supposedly non-violent crimes. But certainly all the shopkeepers down my local high street say, and I said, well, why don't you tackle these people or keep them in the shop until the police come? And they say, because they get violent. They're non-violent until they're violent, a lot of these people. This is the thing. Yeah. A lot of people are just sort of there tearing their hair out of this. But this is the conundrum I really struggle with, which is that we don't seem to see many people arrested anymore for crimes. We don't see many people prosecuted for crimes. And yet our prisons are full. Can you explain that conundrum?
Quite easily, actually. Look, you've got 13,500 prisoners who have been recalled out of 88,000 population at the moment. You've got 10,000 odd foreign national prisoners who are blocking up our beds and costing our taxpayers monies. You've got successive governments who have failed, and I include successive Labour governments who have failed to provide decent infrastructure for their sentencing of increased sentences of prisoners.
So when the public are outraged and we say we want people to go to prison for longer and the Labour or Tory government say yes, no, it didn't occur to anyone to actually build the extra prison cells that they needed for that.
No, it didn't. And this is the problem. It's like if you build a new housing estate and you don't put in a doctors or a chemists or a school or something, you don't put in the infrastructure to go along with that housing estate. Yeah. And that is the problem with our prisons. We haven't maintained our old Victorian prisons. We haven't invested in our staff. It's not rocket science. Anybody can see that if you increase sentences and prisoners are going to jail longer, then you've got to do something with those prisoners.
Yeah. I also saw some statistics this morning that more and more prisoners are being recalled to prison. You said you used that, something more than the 13,500 people who've been recalled to prison. They've been given early release and then they've breached the terms. Now, we know that vast majority of those who breach the terms, it's for missing an appointment or often more than one. It's for not informing your probation officer where you're living and things like that. But it seems to me, well, no one's going to bother doing any of that if there isn't a punishment for it. So we did have that punishment, but a quarter of them, it's for actually committing an offence. So obviously these people need to come back behind prison. But the recall rate is way higher than it used to be. What has changed?
Well, releasing all of those prisoners in October and September last year put an incredible strain on a very already overstretched probation service. So it's much easier to recall somebody to prison because they've missed one appointment than look at the reasons why and try and sort it. You know, so some of them were relatively simple things like, you know, many prisoners who have a home, and those are the lucky ones upon release, you know, that home is only for so long. And if you lose that home and have nowhere else to go, quite often they were recalled to jail. And I think, you know, the whole structure of the justice system needs a complete overhaul.
Yeah, well, I mean, what do we expect these people to do? Often, again, people who can failed by families, they've been in care, they've bunked off school, semi-literate, they're on drugs, they've got mental health problems. I mean, you know, you name it, they come out of prison where they've been sitting in a cell for 23 hours a day doing drugs, surrounded by people who commit crimes, going back to a life where everyone commit crimes and everyone's on drugs. Realistically, what did we think was going to happen?
Well, this is it, Julia. And look, at the moment, our prisons are warehouses.
Yeah.
But actually what they're doing is they're making better criminals for those of prisoners that end up in jail. And, you know, it's just a continuous Ferris wheel of going round.
And the same people again and again. Here's the thing. The answer from the left seems to be, and this is something they're talking about, sending fewer and fewer people to prison, particularly non-violent criminals. And because prison doesn't work, we're told. But there are other countries where prison does work. And I know some of the Nordic countries do a lot of rehabilitation, education. They have incredibly low reoffending results rates as a result. Costs money, though. So when the solution is, well, prison's not working, so we'll do more community sentencing, not prisons, because that'll be cheaper, better, you know, better outcomes. Is that the answer, or is the answer to do prison better?
I think it's a bit of both, to be honest. I think, yes, we've got to do prison better. We've got to focus on more funding for decent rehabilitation programs. You know, some of these programs are a couple of days. Well, I'm sure that's not going to rehabilitate somebody in a couple of days. And also, I think we need to look at our community services. They need to be far more robust, far more helping the community, not just scrubbing a bit of graffiti off. That teaches somebody absolutely nothing. Yeah. What does that do? It does nothing. And I think, you know, so in answer to your question, it's a bit of both.
Yeah, because there are some people who need to go behind bars. I mean, that's the thing. People say, well, it's non-violent offence, but how many times should a shop on my local high street put up with someone stealing, you know, 200 quid's worth of goods every day? I mean, realistically, you know, once, 3 times, 30 times, 300 times? I mean, that's the thing. At what point do we say enough's enough?
Yeah, and I think, again, we need to look at, well, why are they shoplifting? Are they homeless? Are they on drugs? Have they got mental health issues? Have they got family support? You know, there is a whole realm of things that need to be done that are just not doing it. And as I said, you know, our prisons have just turned into warehouses to make better criminals, costing you and me much more money in our taxes.
Oh, yeah, I mean, you can send your kid to Eton, couldn't you, on boarding school, cheaper than you can send someone to prison. Vanessa, always good to talk to you. Great to have that insight. Vanessa Frake, former prison governor, author of The Governor, My Life Inside Britain's Most Notorious Prisons. Philip Ingram, response to that?
Well, I think, you know, Vanessa highlights very, very clearly just how broken the system is. And the thinking that we're getting out of the Justice Secretary around changing the release conditions, bringing people back in if they're called back in for recalled to prison for only 28 days, is sticking plasters. It's not looking at anything from a revolutionary perspective to try and address the fundamental flaws.
And it doesn't need to be revolutionary. Other countries do it.
Yeah.
I mean, none of this is complicated. Some of it provides money. Again, I had a conversation with David Cameron quite some years ago where he said, well, if you want to build more prisons and do all this, it's going to cost money. I went, fine, put my taxes up.
Yeah.
There are things I'm very happy to have my taxes go up if you're actually going to do the thing I want you to do that would make a difference to people's lives. But there we are. I don't think I'm alone in that. 10:48 is the time. I'd love to hear your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. Up next, we're going to be talking about the NHS and the NHS bosses who will be getting bonuses of up to £45,000 for cutting waiting lists. Getting a bonus for doing your job properly? What a wild idea. This is Talk, Home of Common Sense.
I did argue the case that we needed significantly less immigration into this country, but we are where we are. Rishi Sunak actually, at the end, did make some bold moves, which was stopping the dependents coming in and making those deals with Albania to send back criminals. So when Labour does see, which they will see, some falls in immigration numbers, it won't be really what they've done, it will be what Rishi Sunak had done.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Philip Ingram's still with me. Got to get your thoughts on this in the next story, which is West Streeting, the Health Secretary, is looking at paying, bonuses and pay rises as a reward, not a right, to NHS bosses, but also basically saying you are going to be paid less if you fail. Looking at £45,000 temporary pay rises to law bosses to the worst performing areas in the NHS to get them to take over, and bonuses of up to £30,000 for those who perform well. But you could actually see your pay cut a little bit if you don't perform well. I would have thought you should just not be in the job if you're no good at doing the job. But I'm old-fashioned like that. Let's talk to Martin Gower about this. He's a former NHS Trust chairman and joins us now. Morning to you, Martin.
Good morning, Julia.
First of all, when you were a Trust chairman, would you have been getting the bonus or having your pay cut, do you reckon?
Well, Chairman, we were really very poorly remunerated. We were non-executive. But the Remuneration Commission, which I used to chair for both my trusts, we certainly did award bonuses to executives. And we were encouraged to do that, rather, because every time a chief executive earned more or was at risk of earning more than the Prime Minister, we had to apply to the Treasury to get permission. And the answer generally would be, well, give them a bonus scheme. And of course, they were never pensionable. I mean, they were not added to the pension. But there's a really...
It was basically a way of hiding. It was a way of hiding the pay rise, wasn't it?
Well, it didn't hide it because it had to be published in the annual report. So anybody like the local media, who wanted to find out how much the chief executive's gross earnings were.
I don't think people mind their local NHS Trust chief exec or whoever earning a good whack if they're doing a brilliant job and everyone gets seen quickly and you've got a lower death rate and people are healthier. I mean, works for me. What amazes me is that there needs to be any incentive to any of these people to do their job properly and well. It seemed to me it's immoral. If you're not good at running a hospital and getting the best out of your staff and saving lives, I think it's immoral for you to be in that job.
Yeah, I mean, Julia, I came out of the private sector, out of the wonderful local newspaper industry, which I worked in for many years, into the NHS. God knows why they wanted me, but I've been trying to work that out ever since. But I was used, obviously, to getting bonuses as a managing director of newspaper companies, and so were my staff. But I looked at the NHS chief executives with an interesting eye, I think, and that was, would they have succeeded in the private sector had they been running a private sector business? My last trust, we had 8,500 employees. We were a local trust, but we had 100 different locations, actually spread all over the country for some of the specialist services we could deliver. We had £450 million worth of income, so it was a big business. I'm putting business in
inverted. And do you think those managers would have survived in the private sector?
In where I was, I think a good third, including the chief executive, would have done, and there was a reason for that. They weren't box-ticking process people. They managed the people. But they could walk around the organisation and know everybody by name because they'd been there long enough. And we had what I call the motivational atmosphere was good.
Well, they were just, I'm sorry, that's just to summarise, lose the business speak. They were just good at what they did. I mean, hopefully you're in a situation where you know what people do, you know who they are, and can say, is there any problems today? Right, what do we need to do to solve that? Give me your ideas. Brilliant, thank you, lovely, let's do it. I mean, that's a good manager, right? And we know that so many are not. As you say, they're box ticking. We're told, oh, we can't have a target for this and this and this because then, oh, well, everyone gets treated just before the 4 hours at A&E, but then the person who's already gone over 4 hours, you leave for another 3 days because they're already on the bad stats anyway. Those are bad managers. Isn't it that simple?
Well, they're not leaders. They are just managers. They're not leaders. And they don't have those skills to... I mean, I've always said that, you know, good leadership in any organisation is not about getting people to do what you want them to do. It's getting people to want to do what you want them to do. And there's quite a big difference there. And in some places that works, and there are some good people. I have no issue at the other end of the scale from the small local trust to somebody like the Royal Marsden. I don't even know who the chief executive is, but they should be paid very, very well. It's a world-class organisation, widely respected.
But I thought these people just worked in the NHS out of the goodness of their hearts. Like, I've got no problem with anyone getting paid well if they're doing a good job, but on the public purse, we need to know they're doing a good job. Is it fair to say that if a particular chief executive, you know, especially someone who's willing to move, and we've had this with teachers, haven't we? Can you move out of your lovely, leafy neighbourhood school, teaching the middle-class kids who turn up after having breakfast and gone to bed at a reasonable time, to some sort of sink school in the middle of, you know, God knows whereville, and yeah, you know what, pay them a bonus to go and do that. That's a great thing. But is it fair to say, yeah, if you've got low waiting lists in your area and this or that is happening, it's good, it's down to you being a good chief exec? Or is a lot of it just simply down to the area where people are running their hospitals and the people who are coming into them?
It is to some degree, and there are other external influences like the local social care provision, where, for example, you've got waiting lists around the A&E because you can't admit people, because you can't discharge other people who are medically fit for discharge. There's all those things. But Julia, can I just comment on a couple of things in Wes Streeting's...
Yeah, very briefly. We're quite short on time, but go for it.
Well, by rewarding excellence, we'll transform NHS culture from top to bottom. No, you won't.
Yep, full point. Fair point.
This will light a fire under NHS bosses to drive better care, improve the experience of patients and build a stronger NHS. Really?
But also, shouldn't they be doing that anyway? No one should be employed at top level of the NHS, I don't know anyone on 6 figures, who isn't going to work every day planning to do that.
But it's led by politicians ultimately.
Oh, give me a break. One of the reasons when he says he wants to go to NHS England is so he can actually do that. Every time I've spoken to politicians about it, they said, oh, that's a decision for NHS England. Martin Gatt, so good to talk to you. I'm going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much, former NHS Trust Chair. Philip Ingram, you were shaking your head through quite a lot of that, weren't you? As an ex-military man, it must break your soul watching how the NHS is run sometimes.
Well, it does, but it breaks my soul watching how the military is run sometimes. I can only come to the NHS from personal experience. You know, I grew up in an NHS environment. My dad was in a hospital board and all the rest of it. But from my own personal experience and going through an inner city hospital when I had cancer, and it was during COVID. That hospital had been put on special measures for poor management and poor outcomes 2 years beforehand. I was very fortunate, and when I came in, they'd gone through, they'd been inspected, and they'd come out the other end as working very well. The neighbouring hospitals were not providing the same level of care that I got in the same timeframes that I got. It was a postcode lottery. That's not down to government central funding or government control. That's down to local managerial control in the hospital and priorities and getting things right. And the wokery that a lot of those poor managers are trying to bring in, that becomes their focus, takes them away from what their focus should be.
NHS
care.
staff, you have to spend time going to sort of diversity training and all that. I mean, we're assuming all nurses and doctors are homophobic, transphobic and racist and you know everything else. Let's let them get on with their jobs unless they commit a serious HR offence against someone. Can we just get on with it? It is mind-blowing, isn't it? I just find there's something just incredibly bizarre about people being told, OK, we're now going to have a big change and now we're going to focus on doing our job well. Genuinely, it's immoral. If you are in that job and you are not making sure you're doing the best you can every day, you're immoral. Like, if I do my job badly, the worst thing I can do is libel someone. I'll get sacked. But no one's going to die as a result of it. These are life and death matters. So much more to talk about. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and on prisons and everything else besides. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
How much, ladies and gentlemen, are fish and chips where you come from? We'll go to Jason in Crewe.
Jason from Crewe, fish, chips and peas, £7.50. It's the best chippy in England.
Janice in Leeds, go.
Regarding fish and chips in Leeds, it's between £9.50 and £12.75.
Whitby, how much is fish and chips?
3 of us, fish, chips, peas, I think one of us carry sauce, 3 cans of pop, just short of 70 quid.
£70? That's 23 quid a head, man. Even my maths does that. Very quickly, a voice note. Campbell in Scotland, go.
Up here in Banff in the northeast of Scotland, we can get a fillet and a half of haddock with a regular chips for £8 and 10 pence, and it's by far and away one of the best chippies I've ever had.
Kenneth in Surrey, fish and chips, go.
Fish and chips in Ascot, about half a mile from where you used to live, will cost you £12 and 60 pence. Great show. Keep up the good work.
That's why I moved, because you were living there. When was the last time you had fish and chips?
A couple of weeks ago.
How much? Where'd you get it from?
I think it was about 40 quid. It was in the Ivy.
Honestly, you really are. For any of you who think he's a man of the people, I nearly said you're a...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very, very good morning. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense. Just coming up 3 minutes past 11. Whether you're listening on DAB Plus radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device. So lovely that you're joining us today. And with you all the way until 1 o'clock. As is Philip Ingram, MBE, former senior military intelligence officer. Oh, yes, he may have been with the military, may have been senior figure in intelligence, but he can't find his way out of the studio because I've locked it. Lots more to talk about on the show. So it's the only way we can keep him. It's the only way. Coming up in this hour, the UK's economy grew by more than expected in the first 3 months of the year, growing by 0.7% from January to March. That'll be why we all feel so rich right now. I don't know about you. I mean, you know, not worrying about the energy bill, your mortgage, your rent, not an issue, right? Going to the supermarket, not an issue. Booking more holidays, well, I mean, I always do that, to be fair. Not an issue. We're all better off. And genuinely, if you are celebrating, I mean, it appears the Treasury is right now, about 0.7% increase in GDP, which, you know, who knows what it'll be the next 3 months, then, frankly, you need to give your head a wobble. Coming up, we're also going to be talking about the Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, warning in an emergency press conference last night that prisons are once again at breaking point, which we knew would happen. They said it would after those early releases last autumn. She announced that more criminals will be freed early soon to free up space, including domestic abusers and sexual offenders. Once again, they will also, including those people, face only 28 days back behind bars if they breach the terms of their release, including committing other crimes. The Domestic Abuse Commissioner and the Victims Commissioner said lives are being put in danger by those emergency measures. Also, lives are in danger of prison officers behind bars. As we revealed on the show yesterday, an inmate slashed a prison officer's throat at HMP Woodhill, which is a high-security prison, in the latest incident of growing violence behind bars. Who would be a prison officer now? Now, those measures relate to, in terms of early release, relate to men's prisons, but of course women's prisons are chock-a-block too. And no wonder, after people like Lucy Connolly, a childminder, a mother, a Tory councillor's wife, is currently behind bars. She was jailed for 31 months in the wake of the Southport attack last summer after she posted on X that hotels housing asylum seekers should be set on fire. Horrific, horrible tweet. She took it down before 4 hours were up, but she got sentenced to 31 months after she pleaded guilty to a racial crime. She's, though, due to have her appeal against her sentence heard today. We'll be talking to Lord Toby Young, the head of the Free Speech Union, about that later in this hour. Plus, Britain is one of the worst places to eat, drink, smoke and vape. That's according to the Institute of Economic Affairs. The latest report says the UK has the 7th biggest nanny state in Europe. Hey, tell us something we don't know, eh? Philip Ingram, as I say, joining us throughout the show. Lots to talk about. Let's touch briefly on the economy. Everything's absolutely fine. We've got growth. All good. Apparently doing better than the economists expected, because they always get it wrong in one way or the other. And everything's fine now. Is that how you feel?
Do I have to agree because we're in the studio lock-in? The last lock-in I had was only a couple of weeks ago.
I know, I heard about that lock-in.
And that was with Dame Kelly Holmes in the Tower of London.
Well played.
Through the Veterans Can organisation. So,
excellent.
Yes.
Excellent.
But that's nothing to do with the economy.
There's no alcohol in this lock-in, though. This is...
Yes, that's the trouble.
This is just a hostage situation. Philip, I mean, people aren't going to be feeling any better. This is pointed out by the Reform UK. They put out a press this morning pointing out, all this cheering from the Chancellor. It's people don't feel better off. Why? Because they're not better off.
They're not better off, and it doesn't meet what the Chancellor had predicted she needs as a minimum for the growth to pay for all of the policies that the Labour government are elected on. But she's going to take this as a positive and try and spin it that her policies are going the right way and everything else. What hasn't happened in these figures is the impact of her increase in costs and national insurance and businesses and everything else haven't come in. They will come into the next set of figures, and we'll see what the reality is then.
Yeah, exactly. And as you say, pointed out earlier as well, that the sort of growth they need to actually achieve any of their policies they want to do. And again, things like building new prisons, you need to have money in the coffers.
In defence.
And there aren't money in the coffers. That said, if you want to achieve growth, maybe it's a good idea, don't put a tax on jobs.
Exactly.
National insurance rise. I mean, it's really that simple. Let's talk about the prisons, though. We had the announcement, obviously, we've got 3 new prisons being built, but we already knew that. Some of them already started actually under the Tories. Not enough, not soon enough. Failure under previous Labour governments, abject failure under the Tory governments for the last 14 years. But prisons, we are told by Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary are at breaking point once again and basically going to have early release again. And it is going to include domestic abuse. It is going to include some sex offenders. If you have been serving an original sentence of between 1 and 4 years, unless you're a terrorist or deemed by the police or others to be a high risk to the public or other serious offences, you can't be facing release. We're at 99% capacity. Basically, she said if we don't make some space, basically no one could be arrested and then charged and then convicted and then sent to prison. Also, this 28-day limit for basically if you're recalled to prison because you breached the terms of your licence, as a large number of people do, and indeed a huge number of people behind bars. I think 15% of those who have breached their licence. I would suggest that's because they shouldn't have been on early release. Is this the answer, though, releasing more people? Because 17,000 of the 88,000 prison population of men are men on remand. They've not actually been convicted of a crime. Now, most people aren't put on remand unless there's concern. But we've also got 10,000 plus foreigners or foreign nationals. Again, some. Hopefully, I would ideally like all would be deported on the day they finish their sentence. You could argue they should serve their sentences abroad. But many of those would be people who've lived here for many, many years, have family here. They are foreign. Now, I know, oh dear, yeah, exactly. But if you committed a crime to get put behind jail, then tough. Should have thought of that, guys. But we're talking about a huge number of the people. Some would argue don't need to be behind bars. And by the way, a lot of those are on remand. It's because it takes so long for cases to come to court. The whole system is in abject failure. But as a point I put to Vanessa Frake, the former prison governor, was earlier, the conundrum is we don't seem to arrest anyone. We don't seem to prosecute anyone. Barely anyone gets sent to prison anymore. And yet our prisons are overcrowded. How do you square that circle?
But the whole system has been broken and been broken for a long time. And this is what disappointed me yesterday from the Justice Secretary was there was nothing new. There was nothing evolutionary or revolutionary in what she was saying. There was nothing that's trying to find different solutions to deal with the problem. And again, you look at the number of sex crimes that are coming in the country. Large percentages are being committed by the illegal migrants that are coming in, very large number, and they need to be put in prison, but as they're being deported out of the country as quickly as possible. That's not going to happen, and we're just generating a bigger and bigger and bigger problem. We need to have different thinking. We need to have different leadership. We need to have different management in our prisons. We need to have a different approach. Until that happens, it's only going to get worse.
Absolutely, and again, we know what's going on behind bars. The average prisoner is spending basically 23 hours a day behind bars. They're not being rehabilitated, they're not being educated, they're living on drugs. Again, utterly rational to spend your life off your face on skunk if you're stuck behind bars for 20 hours a day. In somewhere where
there's complete control over what goes in and what goes out.
Yeah.
Or there should be.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is just absurd. And then people, and again, the people who go into jail, we know an awful lot of them are drug addicts, alcoholics, they've been in care, they've got mental health problems, and we know that when they come out, those problems are often exacerbated. The argument from the left always seems to be that prison doesn't work, so we should send fewer people to prison. I think prison doesn't work, so we should send people to better prisons that do more.
And have different types of prisons and different ways of doing things. Yeah, as I was saying in the break, with our farmers are saying they don't have enough people to bring the crops in. If you want people to do community service and advanced community service, you say, right, during the time that we're bringing crops in, we have the effectively...
Farmers don't want those people. They want people who turn up and do the job properly and work at a pace. One of the reasons why they don't employ a lot of Brits, by the way, they employ people from Eastern Europe.
If you have people who, if they don't produce to the productive levels the farmers need, they don't turn up or they cause problems, they go straight into prison.
Back into prison.
Yeah.
No, that's a fair point. Yeah, and again, we know every single aspect of service probation, everything is understood. The key thing is justice is very expensive.
It is.
Having decent police, having them out and about, having fast courts. I mean, it is absolutely terrifying and shocking that you can wait 3 or 4 years if you accuse someone of rape to go to court. Not only is that awful for the alleged victim, it's awful for the alleged perpetrator as well if they're an innocent man. I mean, it's just unacceptable. We've got to get to grips with this, and it's abject failures for years.
Yeah.
It was terrible under Tories, but there wasn't any money for a lot of the early years, and then we went into all the chaos. And we are still dealing with that backlog from lockdown as well, where so little happened and courts weren't sitting a lot of the time. But I tell you what I don't think is part of the solution is what's being proposed is this idea of just taking away the right to a jury trial for cases up to a year. Everyone should have a right to a jury jury trial. Everyone should have a right to a jury. It's absolutely vital. Look, we're looking at cases. Looking at cases like Lucy Connolly.
Yes,
okay,
but
she's coming up for appeal. We're going to talk to Lord Young about that. Her case, 31 months. If she had pleaded not guilty and she'd gone to trial and she'd gone to a jury, I don't think she'd have been found guilty. I certainly don't think she'd have gone to prison.
Interestingly, I grew up in Northern Ireland where we had the Diplock courts. The Diplock courts did not have juries. They had 3 judges that were sitting there, and they were dealing with some of the more serious incidents because of the pressure that could be put on juries. Through
but that's different.
Well, but it's not, because they may have been terror organisations, but they're also organised criminal organisations.
Yeah, but still, most of the cases we're talking about are not organised crime or terror related.
Most of them aren't, but there are other ways of doing things where things could be done.
I'd love to hear from you. Give us a call. 0344 499 1000 is a number to call to have your say on this. A text on 87222. Get in touch on X at talkTV as well. Just to mention also, we've got Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are not going to be in Turkey for these Ukraine peace talks. That Zelensky has turned up. I think a bit of a diplomatic coup on his part to basically show, see, Putin doesn't care. But it's interesting, Donald Trump has been speaking right now. He's in Qatar, speaking at American Air Base. He's been, trolling is the best word to describe it. He's been speaking about his election campaign. It's one of those things. He just talks and goes on and on. Yep. You can feel that we're no longer on the Nautic, are we? He told the US troops, we won 3 elections. You didn't win 3 elections. You won 2 elections, absolutely fair and square. The middle election you did lose in 2020. He said, some people want us to do a 4th. I'll have to think about that. And again, a lot of talk about him running again for a 3rd term, which is, of course, illegal under the American Constitution. I don't think that's going to happen. He said since he wouldn't do it. This is just trolling. I just think, again, totally inappropriate for him to ever talk politics at all. He's the US president. But he's not the Republican at that point. When he's talking to US troops in a foreign land, you've got to be studiously non-political. I think that's really bad form. Well,
but that's the trouble with having a head of state who is elected in a political term. No, it is because Macron is political whenever he goes out and does things as a head of state in France.
Not talking to troops abroad.
Yeah, he'll come. He makes political points the whole way through, trying to undermine opposition. And you find that with people in all of these different positions. Where you don't have that is with the German president, because they stay apolitical. But if you look at Ireland, the current Irish president is making more political points and everything else. You need a head of state who's completely apolitical. That's one of the beauties of having a constitutional monarchy.
It is one of the bonuses of it. I'm just still old-fashioned about elected, accountable people. But there we are. As I always said, the Queen, the late Queen, she'd have stood for election, she'd have won 95% of the vote. Exactly. No, and not in a Putin or North Korea sort of way. She actually would have won it for the way she stayed above and beyond politics at all times. Something I think that King Charles, certainly when he was Prince Charles, did not do. Very interfering, all those little spider letters. And again, it's fascinating how much the public just go, oh, not talking about that anymore. And that was long before the very worrying cancer diagnosis.
But
as
Prince
soon as
he
he became king, everyone forgot about those things.
Yeah, but as Prince he can do it, as king he can't. Well, it's the same as Prince William's involved in lots of green things and other stuff. But when he becomes king, he won't.
In terms of Ukraine and Israel and Gaza, Vladimir Putin not turning up in Ukraine again. I think he's overplayed his hand with Trump. I think Trump is going to have to come round to the point where Putin's making him look a fool, and therefore he's going to be backing Zelensky. Fingers crossed that's what happens. But in terms of priorities for Donald Trump, do you think it's Ukraine, or do you think it's what's going on in Gaza, or anything else?
Well, for Trump, his priorities are #1 relationship with China and pressures in Southeast Asia, because that would hit the American economies most. Secondly, it's Middle East, because anything that could then potentially interrupt the oil coming out of the Middle East and the international oil price would have a massive effect on the US economy. So what's going on in Gaza and Israel and the exportation of terrorism, remember, more US soldiers and civilians have died through terrorism that's come out from Middle East related
and there's talk about an Iranian nuclear deal as well.
Well, exactly, and Iran getting a nuclear weapon would destabilise the world more than
Israel are not going to let Iran. Every time they get anywhere close, Israel makes sure they don't. Thank you, Israel.
Well, if Iran does get a nuclear warhead, the first we'll know about it is Tehran will disappear under mushroom cloud. I'm certain of that. And therefore, third priority is what's going on in Europe between Russia and Ukraine. That's not really affecting America in the same way the other two are.
And you can understand that.
Do.
And that is why that's why the Brits and the Europeans do need to step up.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Let's talk about something completely different. Let's talk about migration, because lots of talk about immigration from the Prime Minister's speech on Monday onwards. But a new poll has suggested, this is for a poll for Merlin Strategies Power and Politics Tracker, asking respondents what their ideal level of net migration would be. This is interesting. 46% of voters said they wanted either a one-in, one-out system or for more people to leave the country every year than to arrive. Now, this is something that Nigel Farage, the Reform UK leader, is pushing. It's not, Tories are talking about getting it down, having an actual cap that's voted for by politicians, so they're held accountable to it. We've had years and years of the tens of thousands. Not going to happen. Home Office is predicting in their documents more than 500,000 more people arriving in this country than leaving this country the whole way through the rest of this electoral term. Labour saying they want to get it down, but realistically their policies, what they announced on Monday, we're looking at really only cutting 100,000 a year, and that's if they achieve it. I don't think they will even achieve that. But anyway, that's not good enough. Now, what is interesting is the attacks on Keir Starmer from the left. Also, people on the right, in the middle, basically going, we don't believe a word you say, mate. You've been pro-mass immigration for years. What changed? But the fact that so many voters basically have come along to the idea of no, we don't think it's an economic good. We don't think it's a cultural good. We're fed up. We want it. We want no more people coming to arrive in this country every year than are leaving the country. That is a big change in public perception, isn't it? How significant is that?
It is. I think it's very significant indeed. But that 46%, if you then turned around to them and said, well, would you go and do a cleaning job, or would you go and be a care worker, or would you go and do such and such? A lot of the jobs that the lower paid legal migrants are doing, they'll say, oh no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, you say that. But hold on a minute. But were those? No one was a carer, and no one was a cleaner, and no one before we had this mass boom in the 2000s from Tony Blair. The NHS was perfectly well staffed. We had cleaners. I worked as a cleaner when I was 16. I wasn't from Albania.
Because society had got people in a position where you would go and do a job. Your motivation was, I need to go out and get some work. I don't really care what the work is. Yes, I will do
cleaning other people's toilets.
Well,
I'm going to be honest with you.
But you did it. But people don't do it now because they think they've got it.
16.
Yes, because they think they've got a choice, and therefore we need to change attitudes in society. It's getting that attitude change in society. And the other thing we need to do is stop the mix-up between legal migrants and the illegal migrants out of there. And we need to deal with the illegal migrants and get rid.
That's a completely separate issue. But we also need to deal with the legal migrants who then overstay and become illegal. Plus, whether or not when some also, but again, this idea, and again, we've been told for years, this complete lie. Oh, there's an economic benefit. The EU or anyone from abroad. Actually, the net benefit. I mean, and again, Sadiq Khan was spouting abject nonsense the other day on the radio and on social media about the average migrant actually is a net contributor to where the average Brit isn't, completely ignoring, the people. Yes, I'm sorry we got born on the NHS and were educated in state schools. Therefore, we cost more than the migrant who's turned up at 21. I mean, that's in terms of what is your contribution work, during your work time. The average Brit is not a net contributor because guess what? The very rich pay so much tax. They're paying for an awful lot of the rest of us as well. But that doesn't mean that someone working as a hospital porter or a cleaner or sweeping the streets isn't actually doing really worthwhile job. Absolutely vital job. Yes, some jobs aren't well paid because pretty much anyone can do them because they're not involving a lot of training or academic qualifications. But that doesn't mean those aren't important, worthwhile jobs. Some would say rather more important and worthwhile than a lot of the ones that do involve that training. But this is the thing. You're in this situation where people used to do those jobs. We didn't, I mean, countries like Germany until recent years, they didn't employ a huge number of foreigners running their health service. And we're told, but our health service can't function without people from abroad. This is absolute nonsense. There is a conscious decision. Governments, I mean, Cameron was the worst on this. They limit the number of people who can be trained to be doctors and nurses. And then they say, we haven't got enough doctors and nurses. We need to get them all from the Philippines or from
Well, we steal them
from
from other
India.
countries. That's the trouble.
Yeah, but a lot of countries actually train far more people because there's people know that. But we could provide. We have a few thousand youngsters who are 18, have got grade A's and grade A stars in A levels, in maths and science subjects, who are not able to get a job, to get a place in a medical school because those places are limited. But if you're from any other country, from India or China, Nigeria, wherever, you can come in, you can pay 3 times the fees from abroad, and you can get that training. That's insane.
Completely insane. And this is where government policy coming in and looking at pinch points like doctors, nurses, and all the rest of it. Instead of charging British students tuition fees and everything else, they should get that for free. That's a lot cheaper than trying to then recruit people from overseas and deal with everything else that's there.
Yep.
And in reality,
a lot of those people don't stay. As we discovered.
Exactly.
I mean, people didn't leave because of the EU and the Brexit around 2020-21. A load of people left here in this country to go back home, as people did because of lockdown. And but this is the thing. We've now got an economy, we've got loads of businesses that are just built on having all those people coming from abroad. And people say, well, they're not paid less than Brits. No, but if you've only got a pool of Brits to pay to do that job, and then you add in, twice as many people from abroad, what a surprise. You haven't got limited supply, so you don't have to up your wages. But this is all predicated on you've got to sort out the welfare system.
Correct.
So the 5 million thereabouts people who are of working age who could get a job of some kind, even if it was only part-time. Forget you're feeling anxious on a Thursday morning. Oh, did you feel depressed this morning? I'm so sorry. Well, you know what? So did millions of other people who went to their job and paid their taxes and paid their way. I'm fed up with it. I think most people in this country are fed up with it. When those people are not able to claim benefits, they'll get a job and they'll clean toilets just like I did, and they'll be pleased to get the pay. Simple as that.
German system, you're given a period of time on benefits. You then have to go for 3 job interviews, and if you don't take one of the jobs out of 3 job interviews, you have to take the next job you are given. If you don't take that, you lose all benefits.
Well, you say that, except, of course, virtually every single one of those 3 million migrants who came in the last, since 2015, to Germany, living in Germany, most of those are not working.
Well, exactly.
They're not working. So how are they able to not? And they're getting benefits. They're not on the streets. They're getting benefits.
Yes.
So, but we often
miracle.
talk about how other countries are doing well. They're failing to do with it as well, because we've got an awful lot of people who are in charge now who just feel uncomfortable. Like, you can't force people to work. Not forcing anyone to do anything. I'm just saying. You don't get to live on my buck anymore. As simple as that. I would love to hear from you on this. By the way, Keir Starmer trying to deal with the stopping the boats, the illegal migration issue. He's been over in Albania today. In the last couple of moments, he has said that the UK will begin talks on sending failed asylum seekers to return hubs in third countries while they await deportation. It's not often I'm speechless. What the actual?
Well,
please beep loudly here. What the actual? So opposed to Rwanda, which by the way, other countries now looking at Rwanda as an option, but maybe looking at Albania as a return hub in third countries. This apparently was beyond the pale and awful when he was in opposition. Now, that's official party policy. So are you kidding me?
So something that had been, a lot of taxpayers' money was put into getting it set up and all the rest of it. For purely
370 million?
For purely political reasons, he cancels it, and now he's trying to set something else up in another country that, well, clearly he can't spell, because he's now spelling Rwanda Albania. And this is we need to hold him to account for this, because this is a complete U-turn on Labour Party policy and government policy.
That said, Rwanda wouldn't have acted as a way of actually deterring people to cross, because it was only going to be a few hundred people. We needs to be.
But you just increase the volume.
It needs to be everyone. It needs to be. And not after they failed after their 15th appeal for 10 years.
Yeah.
And also, again, they're going to process 110,000 of these people. They're not going to fail, guys. They're just going to be given indefinite leave to stay. They will be paying for them on benefits instead. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this. Give us... Really? We're going to have to take a moment. 0344 499 1000. You just couldn't make this stuff up anymore. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense. Coming up very soon, we're going to be talking in the next hour to Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary. I'd love to hear his thoughts on that. He left the Home Office because of the abject failure to tackle things and believes that the Rwanda policy didn't go far enough. Can't wait to hear what he says about that. This is Talk.
One doctor, one of the 400 who said they supported it, described the bill as long overdue and a basic human right. Is it your human right to end your life? And this is it. I think individually, as Julia said, I think I should have that right. I genuinely think. But then what if you lose your marbles and you don't really have a sense of what is going on? You have some kind of degenerative illness. It's terminal. What do they mean by terminal? You've got 6 months to live, 6 years to live.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. 11:29 is the time. So much more to talk about today. I still can't get over Keir Starmer over in Albania talking about how having failed asylum seekers processed in a third country. I mean, it's almost like someone came up with the idea before. Coming up in a few moments, going to talk to Lord Young. That's Toby Young of the Free Speech Union over the Lucy Connolly appeal. Everyone's arrived at court today for that appeal over that 31-month sentence for a tweet about the Southport riots. Going to also talk about the nanny state with Chris Snowdon of the Institute of Economic Affairs. First, let's get to your calls. Adam's in Nottingham, wants to talk about prisons. Very good morning to you, Adam.
Good morning, yes. No, it's prisons and my retirement plan, really, because, I've got pensions and everything that's like everyone else paying into, and I work, pay taxes and everything all my life and stuff, but I'm just fear that when I get older, there's going to be no infrastructure to take care of me. So my retirement plan is simply, get to 17, if it's really bad, walk into the nearest bank with my finger in my pocket, stick them up, send me to jail, 3 squares a day, healthcare fully paid for, because I'll be losing my mind like that, like my dad, because my dad's got dementia and the government is slowly stripping him of all his assets to pay for it, so he's got nothing.
You reckon prison might be the better option? I mean, that's it. I still think people say, oh, prison's too soft. I think for most of us, prison would be absolutely horrific. But this, you're making light of it. But this is the thing. People are just, you do just find yourself tearing your hair out of this, don't you?
Of course. Yes, okay. At the long run, prison's not a good idea. It's not a good idea to get freedom taken away. But when you've got the TVs and stuff, and you've got literally immigration tourism, which you come from a place where you stuff sits, where you have to pick up rubbish to probably pay for a bottle of water, or fear of being shot or anything. Prison is a luxury hotel.
I fear you were right on that, Adam. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. I hope I don't see prisoner, but I get your point. Let's go to another caller on 0344 499 1000. Mark is on the line in Lincolnshire. Mark, you want to talk about Ukraine. What do you want to say?
Good morning, Julia Maduck. Right, couple of points quickly.
Okay.
I'll just fire off the 2 points, then you can respond if you want. First one is, you and I have clashed on Ukraine before. Now, my first point is, at this point, Julia, I have to say it, you do come across as, the old PDS, Putin derangement syndrome. You're like almost like a blue-haired Democrat going on about Trump. And I get it. I absolutely get it. Putin's a terrible guy. Russia at fault. I fully agree with that. My second point is, I don't care about Ukraine's border. The reason I don't care about Ukraine's border is because why should I care about Ukraine's border when my own consecutive governments point-blank refuse to protect my own border?
Okay, right. All right, then. Okay, coming back. I don't know how you think I'm deranged about a murderous dictator who murders all opposition and has invaded a number of neighbouring countries, actually imposes a threat to the democratic West. I don't know why. I think it'd be deranged not to be concerned about that. But also, here's why you should care about the Ukrainian border, because it won't just be the Ukrainian border that's at threat. Have you seen the amassing of troops on the Finnish border as well? Why do you think Finland and Sweden who have decided to join NATO? What about the Poles as well? There are many other countries that also feel threatened. That's like saying 1938 and not that bothered about Sudetenland.
Well, no, I fully appreciate your point.
So I'm right and you're wrong then?
A lot of what Putin does is posturing. We all know that's posturing.
Apart from when he brutally kills tens of thousands of people and abducts children and has rape as a war policy. That's not posturing.
Julia, I'm no Putin apologist, okay? What I am, though, is a bit of a realist. And the reality is, and if you put your logical head on here, we've all seen how the Ukraine conflict has gone, the war, however you want to describe it, how this thing has gone.
Well, how are you? You don't think it's a war?
Sorry?
You don't think it's a war? You
Yes
struggle
and
with the
no.
word war.
Well, to me, if it's a war, you've got constant movement. You've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of troops flooding into a country.
There are hundreds of thousands of troops.
No, there isn't.
Yeah, there are.
They're coming in. They've taken the eastern area, the Donbass, usually around the
They're
Donbass.
taking 20% of the country.
Sorry?
They're taking 20% of the country.
Yeah, but they're not going further, are they? They're not.
They're trying to go further. The Ukrainians are fighting back in the war to stop them. I don't know. This is just semantics, but again, so the phone line is getting a bit fuzzy. But just really briefly, I don't know why you think it doesn't matter if a Western democratic nation, however flawed, and it is a flawed state as we all are, why you think that doesn't matter.
I don't think it matters because I don't think Putin's going to be going any further.
Well, good luck with that. I mean, good luck. Let's hope so, eh? But I have a funny feeling that if you lived a little bit closer to that border, you might feel a bit differently. Mark, I'm going to have to leave it just because of the quality of the line. But very brief word from Philip Ingram, who was looking jolly cross when you were talking, Mark.
Yeah, well, Putin is behind a lot of the criminal activity that's going around across Europe. That's pushing a lot of the migrants into where we're going through the organised crime gangs that Keir Starmer can't smash. But if you look at what happened, Putin went in to try and overthrow Kyiv. The Ukrainians pushed them back from Kyiv, pushed them back from northern Ukraine, pushed them back into this little bit in the east, and that's the last bit to get through there. So it's not about movements of troops over large distances, and there are about 400,000 Russian troops at least in Ukraine at the moment, and Ukraine fighting back. Russia is losing over 1,000 a day.
They're not winning the war. It's a stalemate right now, but I think we should make sure that Ukraine wins the war. Philip, thank you very much. Thanks to Mark, also to Adam and York for your call as well. Going to take a very quick break, 11:35. Love to hear your thoughts on all the topics we're talking about. 0344 499 1000. Up next, like to say, Lord Young will be here. He's the founder of the Free Speech Union to talk about Lucy Connolly. She's the woman serving 31-month sentence for a tweet that she wrote in the wake of the Southport attacks. She has got her appeal in court today. How will it go? We'll talk to him about that. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Philip Ingram's still with me as well. Delighted to be joined right now by Lord Young. Toby Young is a Conservative peer, and he's also founder, of course, of the Free Speech Union. I must declare I am a member of that union. I don't know why anyone isn't, frankly, given the threat to freedom of speech we've got today. Very good morning to you, Lord Young.
Good morning, Julia.
Thanks for joining us. We're here to talk about Lucy Connolly. That's a name, of course, that we've all got to know over the last best part of a year. She's a former childminder. She's also the wife of now a former Tory councillor. He was a Tory councillor at the time. And she wrote a post on the day of the Southport attack, around the time that all the rumours were milling about that it was an asylum seeker who had committed that awful attack that left 3 girls dead, many others stabbed. She wrote in a post, and I can't read out all the words because it is absolutely horrific. Mass deportation now, set fire to all the effing hotels, she used the full word, full of the B word. For all I care, if that makes me racist, so be it. It was viewed 310,000 times in the 3.5 hours before she thought better of it, and she deleted that tweet. A few days later, she found that she was arrested. She was in a police cell. She wasn't able to contact a criminal solicitor, didn't know how to do so, and was told that she'd be held on remand until any trial, so it was better if she pleaded guilty and she'd get a lesser sentence. She pleaded guilty. She was sent to prison for a whopping 31 months for writing that post up on the X site for less than 4 hours. Today, she is appealing for the first time her sentence. First of all, do you think there's any chance that she will actually succeed in that appeal?
Well, we're hoping so. The Free Speech Union is paying for her barrister, Adam King, and he has a good track record in cases like this. He was the barrister who acted for Jamie Michael, the ex-Royal Marine, who was charged with stirring up racial hatred because of a Facebook video he posted in the aftermath of the Southport murders. And after he had presented the case for the defence, a jury took all of something like 17 minutes to unanimously acquit Jamie. So I'm reasonably optimistic. It's being heard today as we speak at the Royal Courts of Justice. 3 judges are deciding whether the original sentence was disproportionate. I'm reasonably optimistic, but it's always hard to predict how these things
well, indeed, and especially when it's judges rather than a jury. I think it's easy to predict juries, actually, and it is interesting, the very, very few cases that have actually gone to court where people have pleaded not guilty when it's involved something someone has written or posted online, how things are going very differently than those who were convinced by duty solicitors at the time in those heady days with those riots ongoing that you're better off pleading guilty. And we've all heard, you plead guilty, you're going to get a lesser sentence. And we know, fantastic article and investigation that Alison Pearson of the Telegraph did. I know she's there at the Royal Courts this morning, backing Lucy Connolly, talking to her family and talking to her on the phone. That she was very, very scared. Never committed a crime in her life. She's a childminder. She's written this tweet. She's realised it was an awful thing to have written. She regrets it. But yeah, you know what? You're not going to, if you plead not guilty, you're going to be held on remand. She and every other person in that situation was told you're going to be held on remand behind bars until your case comes to court, and it could be many, many, many months, even the next year, before it comes to court. At that point, most people would think, well, I'll plead guilty, and she pleaded guilty to inciting racial hatred. But you're a Free Speech Union activist and have been for a long time, hence setting up the Free Speech Union. Do you think that what she wrote, I'm sure you and I both agree, it's a horrible tweet, it's a foul tweet, and she should be ashamed of having written it and thought it, but that it was inciting racial hatred?
I think it's a stretch to say it was inciting racial hatred. I think it's even more of a stretch to say it contributed to the disorder last summer, given that it was only up for 3 hours and she apologised after she deleted it. In America, no one would be convicted for posting something like this on social media. Yeah. They'd be protected by the First Amendment.
Unless it's very, very specific. If she'd written, right, everyone, meet me at this hostel where the asylum seekers are, and we're gonna attack people, we're gonna burn it down. Now that would be very different. You'd take a different line on that.
I think we would, and I think that wouldn't be protected by the First Amendment. But there's no question that this particular tweet would. And I think the judge, should, I think, have taken the mitigating circumstances into account. The fact that she deleted it within 3 hours, she apologised. She herself had lost a 19-month child, so she felt the murders of children in Southport particularly acutely. And if you look at the sentences that other people have been given. I mean, her sentence just seems completely ridiculous. I mean, I looked up this morning a grooming gang in Telford in 2013. 7 men were sentenced for a variety of horrific crimes. One man who was sentenced, pled guilty to having sex with a child, got 2.5 years, 30 months. So 1 month less than Lucy Connolly for a tweet. It just, how can that be right? I cannot see how these three...
Yeah, I mean, they're hurty words. They are nasty, hurty words, but they are nevertheless words, not actions. She did say, didn't she? She wrote to some post to other people, whether it was WhatsApps or was it public. Look, I'm going to play the mental health card if the police come and feel my collar. And again, I think the idea that someone who I certainly was aware, once I became a parent, my visceral reaction to crimes against children was much greater. To become a parent, to lose a child, as she did, of course you're going to have a more visceral reaction. It's going to be a far bit greater emotion. So whether she's, quote, using that card or not, it's still a legitimate thing to claim. But as you say, this is the thing that a lot of people are confused about. We're talking today about prisons being at breaking point, these particularly men's prisons, letting people out who've committed domestic abuse, violent crimes, being allowed out early, and even if they breach the terms of their release, only spending an extra 28 days back behind bars and then being released again, and saying, well, we need to do that because otherwise, justice system will break down. We don't have enough prison spaces. And yet, people like Lucy Connolly is behind bars. First offender, she was a childminder. Even the claims about there are other racist tweets. Well, not if you actually read what she'd written. They weren't what you and I or most people would consider to be racist. She had character witnesses from numerous parents whose children she cared for, who are immigrant families of colour, who said they'd never experienced anything like that from her at all. The character that was painted in the court of her and in the media at the time was of a very different person than the actual facts we know about her suggest.
Yes, and I think all of that should have been taken into account by the judge. She's also the carer of her husband, who has a chronic disease, and she also has a little girl herself.
Yeah.
And as you say, many people convicted of much more serious crimes have been let out on licence. She hasn't been let out on licence. That's been refused.
Yeah.
It just seems extraordinarily harsh and disproportionate. I mean, just to give you one other example, Julia, the same judge who gave her 31 months had a young 19-year-old man up before him who'd pled guilty to violent disorder, who'd actually participated in a riot that took place outside a pub, had been involved in a mob that tried to break down the door of this pub and had beaten up a man standing outside the pub and put him in hospital. And there were women and children cowering on the other side of that door. A terrifying experience. Yeah. That man who participated in a riot, he got 20 months. A much lighter sentence than Lucy Connolly.
It's just extraordinary. And it's not justice when it's not fair and it's not meted out equally. Is Lucy Connolly, to all intents and purposes, then a political prisoner?
I think it might be perhaps a bit of a stretch to describe her as a political prisoner, but I think there was certainly a political dimension in the severity of her sentence. We know that it was a particularly febrile time. The Crown Prosecution Service were under considerable pressure to bring prosecutions against people who
was putting that pressure on them?
Well, it feels like Downing Street was putting that pressure on.
We had the statements from Keir Starmer saying they were going to come down on this stuff, and but the rest of the time they tell us, look, these decisions, they're made by courts, nothing to do with us, Gov.
Yeah, and back in 2011, during the violent disorder that took place across the country in 2011, there was a similar clampdown. Only in this case, it wasn't for saying things on social media. It was for people who participated in the riots. Some of them got particularly severe sentences, and some of them managed to appeal those sentences and get them reduced. So I'm hoping, given the amount of time that's passed, and that she'll be successful today and will be released.
Sometimes I wonder, though, whether actually the publicity around her case is helping or hindering. I wonder which it is.
Well, it's hard to know, but as you say, Alison Pearson's piece setting out the case for the defence was extremely powerful. And I think most people reading that piece, most people familiar with the facts in this case, will think, well, what she tweeted was nasty and unacceptable, but 31 months, more than 2.5 years for a tweet that she deleted within 3 hours and apologised for is just, by anyone's book, completely disproportionate.
Do you think she should have been charged with any crime at all? Do you think she should have gone to prison at all for what she wrote?
Well, I think if she pleaded not guilty and set out the extenuating circumstances, I'd be surprised if a jury had convicted her. As you said in the introduction to this segment, I think most people who've been prosecuted with saying something intemperate or unpleasant on social media in connection with the Southport murders and who've pleaded not guilty, very few have, but of those who have, a majority have been acquitted by juries.
Indeed, really interesting. And I know you've been helping and advising people. I would say to people in these scenarios, get in touch with the Free Speech Union. Lord Young, so appreciate you joining us. Thank you, Conservative peer, founder of the Free Speech Union. Quick thought from Philip Ingram on this.
Well, I think as time has gone on, the disproportionality of her sentence has become more obvious.
Yeah.
At the time...
Especially in contrast to others.
Well, exactly. At the time, emotions were running high, not just amongst the protesters and everything else, but amongst the government. The big question we have to get an answer to is what you were alluding to there is, was there political pressure to give her an excessive sentence?
I absolutely think there was, and I genuinely...
And if there was...
I don't think emotion should ever run high in the justice system. The whole point is that you don't get to have a say in terms of someone being convicted or somebody being sentenced if you're involved in it, because emotions, you're supposed to take emotion out of it. I don't think because riots are ongoing anyone should get a tougher sentence. I really, really don't. You can stop riots by doing proper policing. It's an old-fashioned idea, but it does work. We'll have to leave it there, but 11:49 is the time. Up next, I'm going to talk about nanny state Britain with the man who, he's one-man war against the nanny state, Chris Snowdon of the IEA. This is Talk.
Rupert Lowe is front and foremost in that battle. And yet here it was, Nigel Farage and their Yusuf, in their pursuit to completely control reform and not able to take any form of criticism. They sought not just to destroy his reputation, they sought to imprison this man. And every fear I had about Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe, and their Yusuf, forgive me, at that point was absolutely confirmed to me.
Across across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Thank you so much for your company. We'll keep you up to date on that Lucy Connolly appeal at the Royal Courts of Justice. And an awful lot of people there in that case supporting her. And we'll also keep you up to date on any developments from Albania, where the Prime Minister has extraordinarily said that the Prime Minister, the government is looking at, I mean, this will blow your mind, at talks on return hubs for failed asylum seekers in third countries. Except he's not spelling it, as Philip Fingram pointed out earlier, RWA. DA, probably spelling ALBANI. I mean, it's just extraordinary. But he's in Albania talking about smashing those gangs. I mean, but again, if you're smashing the gangs, I don't know why you need to have return policies, because you smash the gangs, right? Oh, no, apparently that doesn't always work, but there we are. 11:53 is the time. Let's turn our attention to the nanny state. It is extraordinary, is it not? The government being totally and utterly, again and again, whichever political hue, unable to protect us on our streets, unable to deal with foreigners arriving illegally on our shores, to deal with criminals, you name it. And yet, constantly getting involved with the minutiae of daily life for every law-abiding citizen. What we put in our mouths, whether we smoke, whether we don't, what we drink, what we eat, what we buy, what we see on television and advertising. The nanny state is in full swing. Well, one man who knows this for sure, it is a one-man fighter against the nanny state, is Chris Snowdon. He's head of lifestyle economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs, a free market think tank, and joins us right now to discuss his latest report, basically revealing that Britain has the 7th biggest nanny state in Europe. Well done us, eh, Chris?
Yes, it's good to have something to be proud of for once in this country.
I mean, we're good at teen pregnancies, right? We do really well on that. We reoffending crime. There's lots of things we're really good at. Turns out we're good at nanny state too. Who knew? I mean, well done.
Yes, successive governments, as you say. In fact, we'd be even higher up, and indeed will be much higher up, I think, next time I do this index in 2 years' time, because we've got so much in the pipeline.
Yeah, we do.
Food advertising ban in October, got ban on disposable vapes next month, got a vape tax next year, and generational tobacco prohibition the year after that. So lots to look forward to.
Well, I said, you are someone who, I've told you many times in private as well, that you've persuaded me of this. I was kind of a little bit, nanny state. In years gone by, like, well, people are doing things wrong, we should legislate, we should tax, we should change things. And you're the one who persuaded me of the slippery slope theory, which is, well, I'll come for this, I'll come for that, I'll come for the next thing. And actually, an awful lot of the people involved in these campaigns are actually prohibitionists. They're anti-fun, is what they are. And I realised, well, I wanted laws against the smoking. I loved the smoking ban, made life so much more pleasant for me and the majority of people who aren't smokers, welcomed actually by most smokers, interestingly, according to polls. But then they came for pretty much everything else after that. They're coming for chocolate bars and fizzy drinks and everything. My worry was they're going to come for my wine and my fizz at some point. That's next on the list. And that has convinced me that, yeah, maybe we don't want a nanny state after all.
Yeah, well, I'm glad I could appeal to your self-interest one way or the other. But certainly, the anti-smoking legislation absolutely opened the door to anti-everything legislation on the same principle. If something's bad for your health, then, the government's entitled to boss adults around, then why not do it with food and drink? And if we're going to do it with smoking. So, yeah, I mean, absolutely, there's a slippery slope there. And if you look at the index, you can see across Europe, we've got 29 countries in the index. Some are obviously a lot better than others. Places like Germany, Luxembourg, Italy are relatively free. But things are getting worse pretty much everywhere. It's just an endless downward spiral. I've been doing this now since 2016, and it's just a really depressing experience every time, because there's so little liberalisation and so much coercive paternalism.
It is fascinating that has become the norm, isn't it? And again, so much of it is about what you see on the supermarket shelves. Things can't be on the end of aisles. Whether you see advertising online or in person, what you can see even on the London Underground network. Apparently, if I see a photograph of a McDonald's burger, I'm going to want one. Lie, I want one all the time. That won't make a difference. How how our fizzy drinks are made, the level of sugar in everything. Now, what most people would surely prefer would just be information. It'd be useful to know that when this packet of cereal is aimed at children and it claims it's all healthy, that actually it's just a bowl full of sugar for your kids and it's not good for them. I'd like to have, I quite like, the traffic light idea, this is a red, don't buy this one, it's bad for your kids. I'd like to know that, but I also don't want someone telling me how much sugar should be in a bar of chocolate or a cake. I'm assuming there's a load of sugar and it's bad for me. That's why it tastes good and that's why I want to buy it. But isn't there an argument when it comes to the argument people give about the NHS? People say smoking, costs lives. Obesity also costs lives. But the argument has always been that it costs the NHS a fortune. So someone's got a choice to eat what they want, but they've not got a choice to impose that cost on everyone else in terms of their cost to the NHS. What do you say to that, Chris?
Well, you can say two things to it. Firstly, you can just abolish the NHS and have an insurance system if that's how you feel about it. If you don't want to pay for other people's healthcare, then I don't really blame you. We can go private and have an insurance-based approach.
Like most of the Western European countries that have great health outcomes.
Indeed, but as that's probably not politically feasible, the second answer is actually this just doesn't stack up as a financial argument at all. The hospitals are full of old people. They're not really full of fat people. And people who die young do not cost the NHS more than people who live a long time, quite the reverse. So there isn't really an economic argument.
That argument is rather spurious, is it? Because, lots of papers, I know the Times newspaper, who are in this very building, they are obsessed with trying to control what, let's face it, poor people eat.
Yeah, the Times is particularly nanny state when it comes to things like sugar and gambling. But much of the media is. And let's face it, some of this stuff is popular with people. The nanny state might not be popular in the round because for the reasons you mentioned, you can see that eventually they're going to come for you.
Yeah.
But if you kind of split people off from one another and say, we're just going out after the sugar addicts or the vape addicts or what have you, you can generally find a majority to persecute a minority.
Yeah.
That's the real problem.
If it's something that you don't, if you don't do it yourself, you're not bothered about it being banned or limited. It's just when they come for your stuff. Look, you've persuaded me over the years because I'm not as liberal as you on a lot of these things, but I think, there's stuff that's sensible or not, but kind of the view that people should be like adults, being able to do what they darn well please with their own bodies. Chris Snowden, it's a fantastic report. You do it every couple of years, and we are heading up those rankings, everyone. Well done us. Thank you very much for that. Just a very quick word from Philip Ingram on that.
Well, yes, with adults, but when protecting children, I think we do need a degree of nanny state.
Absolutely. Well, we just need better parenting. We need to. No, I'm all in.
Parents aren't doing it. So
no, they aren't doing it. No, but again, I'm not quite sure you should have rules on what adults can do in terms of putting what people want to put into their own mouths. And by the way, none of this stuff actually works, which is another argument against it. So much more coming up, including Robert Jenrick, Shadow Justice Secretary, in the next half hour. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good afternoon to you. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Very much appreciate you joining me. So much to talk about in this hour, and whether or not you are listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, always fabulous to have your company. Great also to have the company of Philip Ingram, MBE, former senior military intelligence officer, and loads I want to talk with you about. Coming up in this hour, just to remind you that the UK economy grew by more than expected the first 3 months of the year, by 0.7%. Whoopity-doo. If you're celebrating that, you need to give your head a wobble, and I'm sure we're all feeling an awful lot richer. We're going to be talking to Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary. He had an urgent question in Parliament a little bit earlier in the show. He's going to be here about 12:30 to talk about the Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, who warned yesterday that prisons are once again at breaking point, and announced that more criminals will be freed early to free up space, including domestic abuse and sexual offenders. They'll also only face 28 days behind bars if they breach the terms of their release. The Domestic Abuse Commissioner, the Victims Commissioner and others have warned that lives are going to be put in danger by those emergency measures, which, by the way, won't do anything to solve the ongoing problem of 99% occupancy in male prisons. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin is not, along with Donald Trump, turning up to meet Volodymyr Zelensky in Turkey today to discuss ending the war in Ukraine. And the BBC, we were told by the Director General, Tim Davie, yesterday, can help tackle a crisis of trust in UK society. I mean, this is absolutely laughable, given the BBC, I think, is responsible for the breakdown in trust in their society. This comes after one of the star presenters of the BBC, for now anyway, Match of the Day presenter Gary Lineker, was forced to apologise unreservedly. This is the first time he's done this, by the way. Apologise unreservedly for an anti-Semitic Instagram post. That said, he has since done an interview with The Telegraph, basically saying, if you are someone who's not speaking out on Gaza, you're complicit with what is going on there, which is quite extraordinary. Philip Ingram, just on that, I'd like to point out that Gary Lineker has never once put a tweet out. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm 99.9999% sure, never put a tweet out after the massacre of 1,200 people on October the 7th, 2023. There has been no tweet from him condemning that. OK, but huge number of tweets about what's going on with Palestinians in Gaza and condemning Israel. And of course, that anti-Semitic trope of the rat emoji in a posting he's made, since apologised and deleted. But he says if you're complicit if you're not speaking out in Gaza. Well, you didn't speak out about the massacre in Israel, so you're complicit with the rape, murder, torture and the hostage-taking that happened in Israel. Well done, Gary. You're complicit in that. Philip, what do you make of that?
Oh, I agree with you. You get the Hamas attack launched from Gaza against Israel, which was absolutely horrific. If you don't condemn that, you are therefore, under Gary Lineker's own definition, complicit with it.
And what about, we're going to be talking just a couple of moments to a guest on Ukraine. I don't recall him making lots of posts about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. What about what's going on in Sudan? What about...
Correct. Nothing else around the world seems to matter, but it doesn't get him the social media likes that he wants, because that's so important. You have to choose your causes to be horrified by.
Human being. It's this adoption of just whatever they think the latest acceptable virtue signalling abuse. Perfectly reasonable to be concerned about Palestinians in Gaza, but if your main concern is about Israel, actually your main concern isn't about Palestinians, because the biggest problem the Palestinians have is Hamas.
And I don't see him having made an effort to try and go out there and learn from the ground exactly what's happening.
You can't go out there.
Oh, you can. There's a lot of charities that are taking people
into Gaza.
You can't go into. Some of them will take people into Gaza.
Oh, they'd let Gary in. They'd let Gary in.
Yeah.
You could keep him if you want, but there we are. I've been asking you to get in touch about everything we're talking about today, as usual, particularly about the Justice Secretary saying prisons are at breaking point, more criminals set to be released early to free up space, including domestic abusers and sex offenders. Your reaction to that, 0344 499 1000, very welcome. Text the word TALK in your message to 87222. You can also get in touch with us on X at talkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs one standard network rate message. I'm sure you want to get in touch about Gary Lineker. A little bit later in the show, we are going to be talking about about this with the former BBC executive Roger Bolton, particularly about the BBC tackling the crisis of trust. I mean, you're having a laugh, aren't you, Tim Davie? Also going to be talking in the next 20 minutes or so to Robert Jenrick, as I say, the Shadow Justice Secretary. Also, given that he used to be a Home Office Minister, I'll talk to him about the UK, apparently, according to the Prime Minister, while he's on a trip to Albania today. He talked about legal migration earlier in the week. He's talking now about illegal migration. He wants to begin talks on return hubs for failed asylum seekers. And we're assuming, therefore, Albania would be one of the obvious ones, although you'd have thought Rwanda would have been obvious, but he cancelled that policy. But the Sun's political editor, Harry Cole, our good friend, he has been out there, and he says the Albanian Prime Minister, Edi Rama, says no return hub for Britain and Albania, and asked if he would replicate the deal they have with Italy with Starmer. He said it's a no from him. I've said from the outset, he said it's a model that takes its time to be tested. If it works, it can be replicated, but not in Albania, but other countries in the region. If it works, no reason other countries should not offer it. So that's
back to Rwanda again.
Back to Rwanda again. Yes. I mean, it's almost like this. It's almost like it was ready-made, eh? But anyway, my soul is broken on a daily basis these days, Philip. It really, really is. Is there a single policy that Keir Starmer didn't fight against while he was leader of the opposition? Or indeed, by the way, Shadow Brexit Secretary, that he is not now reneged on? I mean, a single one.
Well, exactly. Well, I think the head of Plaid Cymru, and I don't support her politics, but yesterday at Prime Minister's Questions, asked him in Parliament, how long any of his policies will change and whether he's going to effectively
every week
flutter to the next bright light and change his mind because of that. And he then attacked her in a way that was not very Prime Ministerial.
But I'll tell you what, the other thing I do find it really interesting is actually there was a quote yesterday about him, how the Prime Minister's vision for the country was a work in progress. And when this was put to Downing Street, the spokesman said, yeah, this was true. It's like, you spent years trying to become Prime Minister. You've been elected leader since 2020. You've had loads of time to... You don't have a vision of what you want to do. What is the point of running for office if you don't actually have an idea of what you want to do and you can't hit the ground running and know exactly what you want to do?
I spoke to someone who's a front bench minister before the election, a good 6 months before the election, and asked when they're producing any detail for plans, and he said, we're not. Because we don't want to debate it, we don't want to have anything that we can be held account for. We know we're going to win the election, and then we're going to use the excuse that we were left such a mess. That gives us 3 years.
We knew what they were going to do. Yeah, you can have it done privately, but have some plans when you get in. At least know what you want to do, what you want to achieve. You should have a vision for the country. Otherwise, don't run for office. Oh, right. Let's talk about having a vision for your country, being a free, peaceful, democratic state without an invading force. That will certainly be the vision that President Volodymyr Zelensky has for his country of Ukraine. Currently, though, he's not in Ukraine. He is in Turkey, where he was hoping, although probably not expecting, to have talks face-to-face with Vladimir Putin, the Russian president. We found out last night he wasn't going to travel to Turkey for those talks, instead sending a very low-rank group of men and women to represent his country in those peace talks for Ukraine. Certainly, it does look like President Zelensky has rather called the bluff of Vladimir Putin, has he not, in basically proving that he is ready for peace talks and it is the Russian leader who is not. Well, let's talk about this with Ukrainian MP Kira Ruddick, who joins us now. Very, very good afternoon to you, Kira.
Hello, Julia, and thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you, as always, for joining us. There's no doubt at all that President Zelensky is working very much hand in glove with other European leaders to try and get to some sort of end to this war in your country. But obviously, a lot of the time, not working hand in glove with the American president, who seems to think a lot of the time that the problem is Zelensky rather than Vladimir Putin. But is all this really just a way of trying to prove to the US president that it's Putin who's the problem, not Zelensky?
Unfortunately, this is correct. And it's very painful that right now, 3 years into the full-scale invasion, we still have to prove to someone that it is the aggressor who doesn't want to end the war. It is incredibly painful for Ukrainian people, and I'm sure it is painful for our allies who are in the same alliance with the United States. And it seems that President Trump right now is making European leaders seem very weak. because just this weekend we had European leaders in Kiev who they were making those very strong claims, including Sir Keir Starmer saying no ifs, no buts, there should be ceasefire starting Monday, otherwise there would be sanctions. It seemed that President Trump supported this, and then after Putin's statement that he wants a meeting in Istanbul, there are no sanctions, and there is obviously not a ceasefire, given the recent attacks on Kiev and on other cities. So Western allies seem weak right now, not only to Russia, but actually to the global South, to the whole world. And as for us, we are ready to go ahead as far as needed. It's our people are dying right now, so in this staring contest, we are not going to blink. President Zelensky and delegation are coming to Istanbul to prove once again that Ukraine is not the problem, that the end of the war is in Kremlin, and they hold the keys to that.
I mean, and again, none of this is anything that I think that should even be up for factual debate. It seems so blatant and so obvious, but certainly the fracturing of the Western alliance has been, I think, really worrying. But again, I do blame Donald Trump on this. I think he's horribly wrong on this. I don't think a lot of his, even his own supporters, I think in the polling, even in America, Republicans actually helping Ukraine, and certainly many in Congress. And I think even his own Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who's been very sound on Ukraine until he took up his post. I think they're all trying to manoeuvre him. That said, I'm very much ashamed that European governments haven't been able to do more because we haven't built up our own defences and haven't been able to help you more. What do you say to people? I had a call a little bit earlier. I mean, this is very regular. You see this on social media, and I don't think it's just the Russian bots as well. People say, Ukraine's not my problem. It's not my problem. It's cost us a load. Our energy bills went up. It's a war. They can give the territory to Russia. Russia isn't a threat to us. Russia probably isn't even a threat to any other NATO member. They're not going to take any more territory. Just end what President Trump calls the meat grinder and just sign a truce. What do you say to those people?
First, I would like to address money issue because it has been raising many times. So we say, and we keep saying, let's not get into people's pockets to support Ukraine. Let's confiscate Russian money. 300 billion euros right now being stored in Belgium. And it's just the political will that is lacking to confiscate those money and use them for arming Europe, use them for arming Ukraine, for rebuilding. It's a lot of money, and it can be used to cover for so many expenses. It's like 5 times the amount that Europe has been giving us up to this point. So, let's go ahead if that is the problem. Yeah. So, on the matter of the values, so I would like to ask a couple of rhetoric questions. Does anyone think that Russia would stop at Ukraine's border once they conquer all Ukraine, or they will gather more forces, Ukraine's natural resources, Ukraine's people, and march towards NATO? Because Putin was very clear, he was very open that he wants to rebuild Russian Empire. I want to remind you what consisted of Russian Empire, and it was not only Ukraine. Second question is, how good are the values if you are not standing up for them? Like if you are allowing one authoritarian regime to go ahead and take the territories of a sovereign state, commit all kinds of the war crimes, including kidnapping of children, and then get away with it. Then the question is, why would other authoritarian regimes not do the same thing? And what are you going to tell them then? Ukraine is ready to defend Europe, to stand between Russia and Europe and protect it. The question is, what would happen if we fail? We don't want to do it, but you need to think loud and clear and look at it really holistically. What would happen if Ukraine fails?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's amazing how many people aren't willing to answer those, you say, rhetorical questions, but actually are very, very real practical questions. In terms of your hopes that we can bring an end to the war. Now, and ideally, personally, I'm of the view that, NATO should have stepped in. Yes, I know it's not a NATO member, but all the NATO countries, coalitions are willing to have stepped in, provide you with whatever you needed to oust Russian forces. If that's not possible, as many seem to think isn't an option, What are you willing to do? Willing to give up Crimea, lost in 2014? Willing to give up any parts of the Donbass region? As long as there was a guarantee that the rest of your 80% of your nation state still under Kyiv's control would remain 100% guaranteed by US and European forces? What would you be willing to end the war? Or none of the above?
Let me ask you about those guarantees. So we even didn't hear that there is a proposal that the US and EU will guarantee that Russia wouldn't move forward, because it would mean that they are willing to go to war with Russia if Russia will cross the potential line of separation that is right now. We didn't hear even that. So right now, there is an ask for us to give up on our territories in exchange for absolutely, literally nothing. And this is obviously not what we are willing to do. So the question is, what are the security guarantees? And then the question is, which territories these security guarantees are applied to? And if you don't want to give us security guarantees, that's also kind of okay if we are able to get enough of the weapons and supplies to defend ourselves. Julia, Russia is being said to be ready for a summer offensive. They have gathered their force. They have zero interest in any negotiations because they are kind of already looking at what territories of Ukraine they are able to capture. And the only thing that we have been constantly asking, get us the weapons so we will not be facing our enemy empty-handed. We are not asking for anyone to come to Ukraine and fight for us. We are asking for us to have the means to do that. Okay. And this would be the critical thing. I know why everyone is hesitant to do that, because Europe is still working on its own security plan, because the United States are in this political disarray. But there is not a simple answer to a complicated question. And this is why I'm very skeptical about anything that could happen in Istanbul.
Really good to get you on. I would so appreciate that. I so appreciate your passion. I wish many people in this country felt passionate about their own country. Kira Ruddick, Ukrainian MP, thank you once again for joining us. Philip Ingram, listening to all that, what do you want to say?
Well, after the meeting that Starmer, Macron, Merz and Tusk went to in Kyiv at the weekend, they put a very clear statement out saying if there isn't peace, if we don't move towards that, we're going to take the gloves off and supply weapons. Merz in particular from Germany. Assuming today comes out with no further progress, we now have to live up to that and live up to it quickly.
We've simply got to start backing our words with actions, and the ability to carry out those actions as well. Philip Ingram, thank you very much. We're going to take a quick break. Love to hear your thoughts on all of that. 0344 499 1000. Always worth getting in touch on any of the topics we're talking about. Up next, we're going to be talking to Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick, not just about what's been going on in prisons, but also those latest figures on people supporting a freeze on migration, and the Prime Minister over in Albania saying what he wants to do with failed asylum seekers. Maybe we'll talk about BBC Trust and Gary Lineker. Who knows it? Lots to talk to him about. He's going to be live in the studio up next. Stay tuned. This is Talk.
is becoming worse and worse. And
one doctor, one of the 400 who said they supported it, described the bill as long overdue and a basic human right. Is it your human right to end your life? And this is it. I think individually, as Julia said, I think I should have that right. I genuinely think. But then what if you lose your marbles and you don't really have a sense of what is going on? You have some kind of degenerative illness. It's terminal. What do they mean by terminal? You've got 6 months to live, 6 years to live.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon to you. Welcome back to the show. Very much appreciate you joining me. 12:22 is the time. Philip Ingram is still with me. We've shuffled him along, I'm delighted to say, because Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick, Conservative MP, has joined us in the studio. Very good afternoon to you.
Hello, good afternoon, Julia.
Wow, have we got a lot to talk about. Now, I was going to start with you, first of all, talking about these early prison releases. However, stories that have come into date since we arranged for you to come on the show, particularly relating to the Prime Minister, who's been over in Albania, meeting with the Albanian president there, where he's been talking with him about what we can do to tackle illegal migration. And of course, you're a former Home Office Minister, and indeed you resigned from office over failures which you thought the government wasn't going to get to grips with, even with the Rwanda plan to actually tackle illegal migration. Well, the Prime Minister has announced that the government is going to begin exploring the possibility of sending failed asylum seekers for processing in third countries prior to deportations. Although the Albanian president said, no, it won't be in Albania. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it shows that Keir Starmer's claim to smash the gangs and stop the boats is a total mirage. He has no plan. In fact, everything's getting worse, isn't it? This year is on track to be the worst ever year for small boat arrivals. I don't know about you, but I listened to Keir Starmer's speech in Downing Street
You managed to do
the
that.
other day.
Well done.
It felt like it was a hostage situation. He'd been wheeled out by Morgan McSweeney and his advisors to read out a speech he obviously didn't believe. This is a man who has built his entire career on being open borders, who has opposed every piece of legislation to control our borders, who said border controls were racist, who signed letters trying to prevent the deportation of foreign criminals back home to their own countries. And now he's claiming to be someone who's going to get tough. It's obviously not working. This was a totally performative stunt in going to Albania, and he's been rebuffed by Edi Rama, the Albanian leader.
But he cancelled the Rwanda policy, which was exactly, presumably, it sounds like, exactly what he's talking about doing now.
Well, no, I think what he's proposing is that a very small number of failed asylum seekers get sent to some mythical country, and obviously no country appears to want to play ball with him, whereby they stay there for some period of time and maybe then get deported back home from there. But this isn't going to solve the problem. It's not going to create any deterrent. The deterrent comes from knowing that you arrive on British soil, if you manage to get here in the first place, you're detained immediately and you're removed within hours and days, not weeks and months. That was the premise of the Rwanda plan. He scrapped that, and as a result, numbers have soared back up again. And we've got some of the highest grant rates of any European country right now.
And not necessarily just for asylum.
Hardly anyone does fail in their asylum application.
Indefinite leave. They're not granted asylum, but they're given indefinite leave to remain, aren't they? We're actually way higher than countries like Germany.
Yeah, exactly.
Often people have actually applied and failed in another country before they come here.
That's right. And people...
Why is that?
Well, people keep asylum shopping until they eventually come to the UK as a sort of final port of destination, and then they often spuriously claim that they're from countries like Afghanistan, Eritrea, where we have an almost 100% grant rate. And so, surprise, surprise, they never leave the UK. So his plan, even if you managed to find a country that was willing to work with him, is not going to work. Okay. You need to have a proper deterrent. That was Rwanda.
Well, it wasn't. It was only involving a few hundred people. That's not a proper deterrent. It's not what Australia did, is it? Well,
it was the beginning. As you know, I ultimately resigned because I wanted to strengthen the Rwanda deal. Right. I wanted to scrap the human rights law so we could send everyone out there immediately.
Before we go on to your brief in opposition, there's also a poll out today suggesting that a huge 46% of the population, when it comes to legal migration, people actually granted visas, and we've seen the explosion. I think next Thursday, we're going to be getting the latest figures on what 2024 did actually bring for us. They're nearly always an underestimate, the earlier figures, but we had, I think it was 728,000 net migrants, so people more arriving than leaving the country. Before that, it was over 900,000, but 46% of the population apparently would approve of a net zero migration policy, one in, one out, or fewer people being allowed in than leave the country. This is certainly the policy of Reform UK. You've been making lots of talk about, well, we should, do what we can, whatever is necessary to make sure that people aren't basically cancelling each other out, Reform voters and Tory voters at the next election. Would you support a one in, one out net zero migration policy?
Well, I've said for a very long time that we need to bring migration right down.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean anything.
Well, let me finish the point. To as close to zero as possible, because I think the country just needs.
What is as close to zero as possible?
Well, I'm not the shadow home.
Is it tens of thousands?
I'm not the shadow home secretary.
Well, you know, so Chris, you must talk to him occasionally.
It's not for me to set the policy, but I've been very clear that the country needs breathing space right now. We've been through an age of mass migration that was born by Tony Blair and continued under successive governments. It was catastrophic.
It got bigger under the Tories by a huge
Julia,
margin.
I'm the person who has been the most painfully honest about this. I ultimately resigned over our immigration policy. Catastrophic mistakes were made. It's put immense pressure on housing, public services. It's undercut British workers' wages. It's ultimately made us a much more disunited country where integration has proved to be impossible because of the numbers coming in. Let's bring it right down. Let's give the country a period of breathing space. I think that is what the poll that's come out today shows. Okay. And I've advocated for a very long time that the way you do this is by having a cap set by Parliament, that it's the law of the land, a democratic lock, so that for once politicians will know that the public will know that politicians are actually telling the truth. They're sick of the lies that you've had. Okay. And you saw more of that from Keir Starmer this week. Just another politician standing up, promising something on immigration when he knows it is not going to happen. His own Home Office says it's only going to lead to a reduction of 50, maybe 100,000 max a year. You're still going to have massive amounts of immigration for years to come.
OK, let's go to something that is very much within your brief. You're the Shadow Justice Secretary. Yesterday, the woman you Shadow Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, announced that prisons are once again at breaking point, which we all knew would happen. We had those early releases last September and October, very soon after they came into power as a Labour government. She's announced that more criminals are going to be freed early to free up space. That's including domestic abusers and sexual offenders, and also announced that those who do actually breach the terms of their release, and an awful lot more people do that than certainly used to, will only face 28 days back behind bars, whether they commit a further offence or not. We've had the Domestic Abuse Commissioner, we've had the Victims' Rights Commissioner, and others saying lives are going to be put in danger by these emergency measures. Is she right to do this, or does she have no other choice?
Look, politics is about choices. And the Justice Secretary could have chosen to focus on the 10,500 foreign criminals who are in our prisons and deport them from this country. She could have focused on the fact there are 17,000 people in prison awaiting trial because the courts aren't sitting round the clock. She didn't choose to do either of those two things. Instead, she's releasing criminals early who have either reoffended or breached the terms of their early release, their licence. That is going to put the public in danger, and we've already seen in the past the consequences of her early release schemes. The last time she did this, somebody was killed the very same day that a criminal was released from prison.
We even had prisoners joking as they came out of prison that they were going to be back behind bars.
Yeah, they were popping champagne corks, being picked up by Rolls Royces, saying they were going to vote Labour because Keir Starmer had let them out.
But you know as well as I do that if you were still in power last September, October, when these releases happened last time round, you'd have been doing exactly the same thing.
Well, when we were in government, we had Cobra meetings every couple of days.
Well done. That must have made a difference.
Well, it did actually, Julia, because we didn't do an early release scheme like Labour have done. The then Justice Secretary, the Prime Minister, ministers were meeting every day, working round the clock to try and find every possible answer other than releasing dangerous criminals onto our streets, because we were absolutely damned if we were going to do that.
Wasn't there another solution?
Labour have ended up doing this.
OK, phone in everybody. Can anyone think of what we should do when we put more prisoners behind bars, we've got more crimes, we've got people serving longer sentences, policy brought in by the Tories, quite rightly, I believe, and we've got running out of space. Is there a solution? Can anyone call in on 0344 499 1000 and help a Conservative politician about what might have been done in those 14 years to deal with that? Build more prisons?
Well, we should have built more prisons. Absolutely. I want Julia to build more prisons. I think we should be sending more people to jail and for longer. The last Conservative government didn't build enough prisons. No government, frankly, in my lifetime has built enough prisons. So we need to do that.
We're often told we put too many people behind bars, though.
I want to put more people into prison because I want to get these people off the streets as a matter of public protection as well as punishment. You know, the Labour Party have an ideological aversion to this. They think that we should be letting these people out, that we shouldn't have them in jail. I think we need to control these people in prison to keep the public safe. If you look at the stats today, 9% of criminals are causing almost 60% of all the crimes in our country. So we need to get those people off our streets and into prison. And yes, you're absolutely right, that does require us to build more prisons.
Is it also the kind of prisons? Because we know some of the countries, like Nordic countries, they actually spend a lot more on their individual prisons, but they do a lot more as well. They don't have prisoners sitting 23 hours a day in their cells off their heads on skunk watching television. They have people actually learning. We've got a lot of people, and getting skills and being rehabilitated. Huge number of people behind bars. And again, I don't think this should be used as an excuse for people, but nevertheless, huge number of people behind bars are coming from broken homes. I don't mean mum and dad aren't together. I mean totally broken homes, neglected, abused. They've gone into care. They've got mental health problems. They've got drug or drink addiction problems. They've lived in a world where the crime is what they do. Everyone they know is committing crime. You put those people in prison for 6 months. You take them out again. What on earth do you think they're going to do afterwards?
Yeah, well, today our prisons are both very expensive and very ineffective. So it's costing about £700,000 to build a single prison cell, and it's costing about 50 grand a year to maintain a prisoner inside. And yet, as you say, prison rehabilitation is poor. About 80% of offenders will go on to reoffend. Education in prisons is poor. There's few opportunities for apprenticeships and gaining the vital skills that you need to build a life when you leave. And as you've seen in recent weeks, much more worryingly than that, our prisons are riddled with serious violence. Yeah. So that our prison officers, who are brave people doing a tough job, often for not very much money, are going to work genuinely fearful about their own personal safety.
What's the solution to that?
Well, I think governors need to stop appeasing prisoners, particularly the most dangerous offenders and terrorists. I mean, I think it's ludicrous that prisoners have had access to kettles, for example, to boil water, when we know that they've been used time and again to attack prison officers. I asked the government just last week, will they take these kettles off prisons? That doesn't cost money.
Particularly to terrorists they've been using.
Particularly to terrorists. They haven't agreed to do that yet. I want prison officers to be given stab-proof vests, but of course it shouldn't have come to that, should it? You need to have governors stop appeasing prisoners, particularly terrorists and Islamist terrorists within our jails, and get control of the prisons once again.
OK, the conversations about sentencing and early release relate to men's prisons at 99% capacity. But let's talk about women's prisons. Should Lucy Connolly, the wife of now a former Tory councillor, a childminder who wrote a horrific, unpleasant, very nasty tweet on the day of the Southport stabbings about, set fire to all the hostels, I mean, various rude words I can't say on air. She's got an appeal coming out against her 31-month sentence after she pleaded guilty to inciting racial hatred or back in August last year. There's a technicality on this appeal. It involves whether or not the right charge was brought and whether the sentence was appropriate. But when you have people who have committed numerous crimes, shoplifted hundreds of times, only been caught for a certain number of them, but committed numerous crimes, we've got domestic abusers, we've got violent criminals, we've had people involved in grooming gangs who have been given sentences lower than 31 months. What is a first-time offender woman, mother, carer to her family, a childminder, for writing something as unpleasant as it was? What is she doing behind bars for 31 months?
Well, I think you're right. It offends a basic sense of fairness within the criminal justice system. Look, it's a matter before the court now, so I can't comment on that specifically. She herself deleted the tweet because she decided it was wrong, and I certainly don't condone the comments that she made. But is it right that somebody goes to prison for that period of time for a tweet when you've got dangerous people being released early under the government's policy this week, and there are so many cases of people who've committed crimes so much more serious than this who are not going to jail? I'll give you an example. This week, a man avoided jail despite it being found that he had 12,000 images of children on his computer, pornographic images, one or more of children as young as 1 year old being raped, and the man doesn't go to jail for that. And yet, here you've got Lucy Connolly going to jail for a long period of time, as you say, somebody of previous good character, for a tweet. I think that offends most people's sense of fairness.
But how is that happening? Why are judges making such terrible decisions in those cases. I mean, look, I'm just thinking, I was going to move on, I want to talk about BBC with you. Hugh Edwards. You know, the man who, he was the man who was the voice of of our lives on television. You know, the Queen's funeral, the coronations, you name it, the elections, and he was sent images from a paedophile of babies being raped, for God's sake, and not a day behind bars.
Yeah, look, I think people are right to question whether judges are applying the rules correctly.
But we can't do anything about it because they're unelected and unaccountable.
Well, I think we have to hold them to account. Any public servant should be held to account, and I've been doing that. I mean, I'll give you an example.
You have to be fair.
I've raised some of the grooming gang sentences, and I applied to the Attorney General, who ultimately had some of the recent sentences that were handed down in Bradford brought before the court, and this week they were increased. But they're still pitifully low. These were men who had queued up to rape a 13-year-old child, having plied her with heroin, and initially they were given a sentence as low as 6.5 years for that, now increased to 10 years. But something is going wrong in our system that firstly judges made that mistake in the first place in sentencing so poorly.
I'd say the 10 years
but then
isn't
10 years
enough.
is nothing. It doesn't even come close to what the public would expect.
No one serves their full sentence.
It doesn't even come close to what people would expect.
If you became Justice Secretary, can I ask, could the first thing your job be that when someone is sentenced to 10 years, or 4 years, or 1 year, or whatever, that they serve the actual length of time they've been sentenced? And yes, if there's good behaviour, that's fine. That should be a given. If there is any bad behaviour, attacks on fellow prisoners, attacks on staff, drug dealing, whatever, you serve more time. Do we not have to get back to the basics that when a family, when a victim are told that this is the sentence that someone serves, that is the sentence they are actually behind bars for?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I've met victim after victim.
We've got that on
of
record,
crime
everybody.
Who think the system is completely broken because you're told one thing and then something completely different happens. We're now at a point where people are serving maybe 40% of their sentence as a result of the government's early release scheme. Now, as a result of what we've learnt in the last 24 hours, if you're sent out, on licence back into the community, even if you reoffend or you breach your licensing conditions, you're only going to go to prison for 28 days and then you're automatically let out again. What is the deterrent in that? I mean, no deterrent whatsoever. People are losing faith in our criminal justice system right now.
I think they've rather lost it already. Just talk about faith in the BBC. We had Tim Davie, the BBC Director General, yesterday talking about how I thought, God bless him for thinking this, that there is a crisis of trust in society, but the BBC has a role in helping to tackle Britain's crisis of trust. I think a lot of people feel that the BBC has been part of that collapse in trust. I'd say particularly also over their coverage of the Israeli-Gaza war, and I think some of their coverage is certainly in the last few days in particular, absolutely shocking in terms of their willingness to take everything that Hamas says as gospel truth. And Nick Robinson on Radio 4 the other day accusing the Israeli government representative of propaganda only. We've also had Gary Lineker, the Match of the Day presenter. He's outgoing, of course, in the next year or so, but over a huge number of political comments he's made over the years. Extraordinarily this week, he tweeted out or retweeted something from a pro-Palestinian group which had a blatant anti-Semitic trope in it. It had a rat emoji. He was told it was clearly anti-Semitic. He deleted it. He's now issued a full apology. But he has said, crucially in an interview with The Telegraph, that if you are silent on Gaza, then you are complicit in the deaths. What do you say to him?
Yeah, I thought his comments were disgusting, and many other people would have lost their careers over this, whilst the BBC consider it enough to issue an apology, albeit a fulsome one, afterwards. I think the BBC have got very serious questions to answer. I shortly after October 7th, raised directly with Tim Davie the fact that back then they weren't even calling Hamas a terrorist organisation, and they had to be pushed kicking and screaming to even acknowledge that. But also, it's broader than just that with the BBC. It's their priorities. When do you hear them talking about the issues that most people in this country actually care about? Certainly an issue like immigration barely is covered by the BBC, and not in a way which speaks the language of normal people in this country.
The sentencing stuff from yesterday, you could barely find it on the BBC website today.
Yeah, no, they have an obsession with some issues, whether it's net zero,
trans,
Gaza, and they barely talk about the priorities of most people in this country, and that's why many of these programmes are losing so many viewers.
OK, Greg, just finally, interesting, Keir Starmer is in Albania. He's asked by a journalist whether he would be fighting, what his plans were for the future, whether he would be fighting the next election. He replied, interestingly, "You're getting way ahead of me." Do you think he's not going to fight the next election?
Well, I've no idea, but I don't think he's going to win the next election at this rate, because he's managed to become one of the most unpopular men in Britain.
Who is going to win?
Well, I want Kemi Badenoch and the Conservative Party.
I didn't ask you who you want. I said who is going to win.
Well, the Conservative Party is going to win, but we've obviously got a massive mountain to climb, haven't we? Because we lost a huge amount of public trust and confidence, and I'm the first person to acknowledge that, but we've got to win that back by being honest about the mistakes you made.
If you have to do a deal with a Nigel Farage reform to do that, to oust Labour, would you do it?
I want to put reform out of business. I want to send Nigel back to
And if you can't put reform out of business, which doesn't look likely right now, given they're ahead of you by quite a long way in the polls, would you do a deal?
No, look, Kemi's been very clear. No pacts, no coalitions.
Are you very clear?
Yeah, I've said for a very long time that my objective is to bring back, over time, the millions of voters that we lost at the last election.
Robert Chedwick, always great to have you in the studio.
Thank
you very much, Conservative Mifield, Shadow Justice Secretary. We get your thoughts on that. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Up next, take a quick break. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, this is Talk, the home of common sense. 12:44 is the time. Philip Ingram's still with me, staying in the studio actually for that interview. Covered a lot of ground with Robert Chedwick, not just in his current job as a shadow, but also his previous job working at the Home Office, and also to talk about many other things as well. What do you want to come back on?
Well, the thing I wanted to come back on is illegal migration. The day that Keir Starmer made his speech this week, there was 605 illegal immigrants came across the channel. That's
was it 600? I revised up from it was a couple of hundred, then it was 500 now.
605 I read. That's an infantry battalion. Since the beginning of this year, 12,000 have come across. That's an infantry brigade in military terms. And since we've been gathering statistics since 2018, about twice the size of the British military.
It's so many people, isn't it?
We should be worried.
I mean, I think we already are. I think people are. And again, you've got, it is the case, there's legal migration, people worried about, illegal migration, two separate things, but actually often legal ends up becoming illegal anyway. Yes. People overstaying, don't they?
But these are the boat crossings.
Yeah, exactly. And again, a huge number of foreign prisoners. And again, it's amazing when you talk about housing, about the economy, you talk about crime, you talk about prison. It's amazing how many of these stories conflate.
And the overall cost, as Robert was going out, he said it costs £500,000 per illegal boat crossing
for their lifetime when they're
here.
But I just find this statistic cannot be right, because as we know, they are all entrepreneurs. Engineers and brain surgeons.
Yes, of course. Yes.
I know I keep making that joke every day, but that is literally what is claimed by the woker artery. Let's get to the calls quickly. 0344 499 1000. Tony's on the line in Lancashire. Tony, you wanted to talk about prisons. Where are you on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've mentioned this one before, so I would deport foreign criminals straight away. I wouldn't bother incarcerating them. But I think there will be a massive deterrent if they realise that if they get caught for anything, they get sent back.
Well, hold on a minute. What if someone's committed rape here? Like, say, a woman is raped, a British woman is raped here. Like, I want them to serve time behind bars. We can't guarantee if we deport them they're going to be behind bars elsewhere, unless we can guarantee that.
I think we should be setting that up with all these with these countries anyway. If your people come here, this is it. You're getting them back. If they commit a crime, you're getting them back, and you've got to deal with them.
No, you're quite right, actually, and that should be. Otherwise, no visas for your country.
Absolutely, because it costs us a fortune. But the other thing I would do as well, with your softer criminals, so the non-violent ones and such, I would split the prisons and I'd have them working 12 hours, and they'd be sharing cells. So, 12-hour shifts in a cell, 12 hours grafting, cleaning the streets or whatever, because there's loads of jobs he's doing here. This is the dirtiest country in Europe, I think.
That is so true, absolutely. I mean, certainly the community sentences that should absolutely involve doing those sort of jobs. Tony, thank you very much indeed for that. I couldn't agree with you more on that. Let me go to some of the texts and tweets very quickly. Tilly says, here's an idea. Well, how about we remove all exterior prison doors, replace them with revolving ones? That way we can save time by just having a continuous replacement of prisoners each time a cell needs to be made available. I mean, you laugh, but... why not? Billy says, deport the foreign criminals. That's everyone else is saying. Stop sending shoplifters to prison. That would be a good start. I'm sorry, you've got to send shoplifters to prison. I mean, at what point do you say you've got to be taken off the streets? Of course, Labour will release prisoners early, says David, except political prisoners. I wouldn't live in the UK now if you paid me. Nathan says, emptying prisons of criminals to make room for people who post allegedly mean messages on social media for the too easily upset. That's the world we are living in. Oscar echoes that. Stop jailing people for hurty words. Right now, we're going to find out how you can be in with a chance of winning a weekend away in Munich at the end of May. It's to watch the biggest game in European football and, of course, talking about the Champions League final. We're also putting £5,000 in your pocket to spend however you want. Take a listen.
Win a once-in-a-lifetime trip to watch the Champions League final live. Go to talksport.com/win for your chance to embark on the ultimate odyssey of football ecstasy. With 2 tickets to the Champions League final live at the iconic Munich Football Arena, Germany, including flights, accommodation and an uber-massive £5,000 in your hand. How about that? Enter online now at talksport.com/win. Terms and conditions apply. Achtung, baby.
18 plus, UK, excluding Northern Ireland. For a chance to win all of that, simply text the word football to 83338 by the 16th of May at 11 p.m. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You must have the bill payer's permission, or send your name and number by post to Champions League final competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 21st of May. This is a TalkSport limited competition run on TalkSport Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
Well, thanks to Mike for that. But don't miss out on this incredible giveaway that's from our colleagues at TalkSport. Right now, we'll take a quick break. Up next, we're going to talk about how the BBC can help us win back trust in society. Yeah, really, on BBC, part of the problem rather than part of the solution. And why has Gary Lineker finally issued a full apology for one of his tweets? About time too. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
I cannot in a million years, even if I really exercise myself, even if I really try and understand what is divisive about Island of Strangers, I can't find anything in it. We're an island, yes, and if people don't know each other because they're not saying hello to each other on the street, they're strangers. What is so divisive about saying Island of Strangers?
I just think it's unnecessary and it's a bit exclusionary.
It's
and
not,
it's
just
I think it is.
words.
And I think it's no, but words matter and language matters in politics. It does.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Philip Ingram still with us, and delighted to be joined now by former BBC executive Roger Bolton. Very good morning, good afternoon to you, Roger.
Good morning, good afternoon.
Thanks for joining us. I want to talk to you first about Tim Davie, the BBC Director General, who yesterday talked about how Britain Britain's having a crisis of trust and how the BBC has a role in tackling that. I would very much say that the BBC is part of the cause of the crisis of trust, part of the problem rather than part of the solution. But do you think it can be part of the solution?
Yeah, well, I disagree with you. I mean, I think you and your organisation have as much responsibility as the BBC. You clearly give very valid opinions, but one-sided opinions. Others give that. What we've got down generally in society is a breakdown in trust against the background of an uneasy society in a whole range of ways. So I think that it's not just a problem for the BBC, it's a problem for all of us, including you.
Clearly, I love the pointing. I mean, here's the thing, though. The BBC is funded by taxes. People go to prison if they don't pay their TV licence, ultimately. We are a choice of people to fund by listening and advertising and the like. I'm employed to give my opinion. We hear lots of different opinions. We challenge people. I challenge people who I agree on a lot of things. But the BBC... No. The BBC has a very different role because they are a state broadcaster.
I agree, but they also have to compete with people like yourselves who express what you say is common sense, but in my view is often a one-sided approach to complex problems.
Common sense is fairly one-sided.
Well, maybe, but for example, on immigration issues, whatever, I haven't seen on your network something which says, on the one hand, you've the difficulties of integration and immigration. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, you've got an ageing population, mm-hmm. social service primarily provided by people, immigrants and others, that if we wish to stop immigration...
Social services aren't provided largely by immigrants. I wouldn't say that because it's not true.
No, all right, no. Would you accept that a very significant number of the people who work in social care, particularly with old people, are people from an immigrant background?
In certain areas in the southeast, yes, but that's not actually the case in most of the country.
Well, I question that. But anyway, the point I'm making...
Sorry, I know the facts.
These issues are complex. And
I know enough about them to be able to tackle those complexities. Now, here's the difference. The BBC is a completely different kettle of fish because it is funded by people. Even if they don't want to fund it, they have to fund it. It's funded by the state. And this is the key thing. In terms of crisis of trust, when we talk about, we've got the BBC where they won't refer to, for instance, Hamas as a terrorist organisation. They were basically, after months, persuaded to say that it was prescribed by various the UK, US and various other governments. When they have given, I would say, incredibly one-sided broadcasting on, let's face it, Brexit. I would say on issues like immigration and crime, where they actually failed to cover a lot of the legitimate concerns, climate change, trans issues. I think they've actually failed. Even Women's Hour failed to tackle the issue of trans women stepping on women's rights for many, many years. How can you possibly say that they are part of the solution when they've been part of the problem?
Oh, you finally asked me a question. Thank you.
Roger, don't do this every time. It's so boring for our listeners.
Boring for me, having to listen to you, and I would like to answer some of your
I asked you a question. First time, second time, and third time.
BBC has a responsibility to represent a wide range of views, and you tend to pick on things that you disagree with. I could go on and on about the bravery of BBC reporters around the world, in China, in Russia.
They did a great job. Yeah.
Right. Also, in the Middle East, Jeremy Bowen, a whole range of other people.
I could disagree with you on that.
All right, you might have thought, but I could point to all of those things. The point is, if you look at it in the round and you look at the World Service, you have an organisation that broadly you can trust and one which is doing it best and makes mistakes. which it sometimes doesn't add up to admit sufficiently. But compared to almost any other organisation in the world, it is, it is the most trusted news organisation.
It is, and I'm saying I don't think it should be anymore.
Oh, well,
I used to be, and I want it to go. I'm not a defund the BBC person. I want it to go back to what it used to be. But you say yes, actually, some of the war reporting is absolutely. That said, I think their coverage in the Middle East, I think is an abomination. I think it's an outrage. A lot of their coverage of what goes on in the Middle East. But you mentioned all these other things. There's been some amazingly very brave reporting in Russia and places. I absolutely agree with you. However, when you push a trans ideology, which is completely mad, when you only allow one side of the debate on climate change, when you only push an agenda on immigration, which they have done repeatedly, you're not providing both sides of the story. You're not informing people. They're not part of trust.
Julia, you just made a series of contentious statements.
They're not contentious to anyone who knows their facts.
Not somebody comes from your position, but for others, another position would say the opposite. Let's break it. Have you got time?
But they wouldn't be based on fact when they said that.
It would. If you
people are banned from the BBC because they don't agree with climate change as the biggest disaster facing the world.
That's not true. That's not true. Hold on.
Yes, they are.
Well, can I reply? In terms of climate science, largely, you will find it very difficult to find a serious climate scientist in the world.
No, that's not true. You say so many things that are factually, provably untrue, Roger.
Let me finish. Who will not say there's a significant element of man-made contribution to climate change.
You'll find thousands of serious scientists who've won Nobel Prizes even who will say that. But they're not on the BBC. Yes, okay, Roger.
Okay, well, I'd like to have a sensible, calm conversation.
We are, but we have to base it on facts.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to, and I don't think
you're just saying things that you think. I'm basing them on facts.
No, you're just stating that the BBC's... I mean, like it has a trans agenda. It doesn't have a trans agenda.
They talk about trans all the time. Even when there's a women's issue, they have a trans woman talking about it half the time.
Hold on. They have a programme called Woman's Hour, which I'm sure you listen to, for example.
I've never once. I've appeared on it and against better judgment.
Well, therefore you haven't listened to, so you shouldn't be making comments about it.
Well, no, but I know what they cover because I look at it.
Julia, what I'm getting is continued prejudice from you and a refusal to look at the facts calmly and to accept that in a divided country, when there are lots of debates going on, the BBC's job is to represent all points of view, not
They don't. My point is, I'd love it if they did that. They don't do it. They never have done it. They never will do it. We didn't even get to Gary Lineker. Roger Bolton, thank you for joining. I do appreciate that, of you joining us. But again, I'm always amazed. People say, oh, you this, that. No, I mean, I don't have any opinions that I don't believe are based on fact. Someone can produce different facts. I'm happy to change my opinion. But Philip Ingram, in terms of Gary Lineker, I mean, he's done this interview with the Telegraph since saying, people saying, well, he says, if you're silent on Gaza, you're complicit. But people pointing out, well, he was silent